Jeremy Corbell.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me back again today. Wow, I just got out of editing a movie, come here to join you guys, and had to whip together this presentation, current and modern, because so much of this footage I've never been able to show anybody. This is the case of Bob Lazar. Who in this audience is unfamiliar with the claims of Bob Lazar? Don't be shy, raise your hands. I need to know. Cool, that's going to change. All right. So this case is really close to my heart because it is the reason, most likely, that I got interested in UFOs at all. This was before I started looking into the subject. It was before I even knew anything about the subject. Probably like most of you, I heard Bob Lazar's claims, and that's what inspired me to try to find out, is he telling the truth? The central question about Bob Lazar and his story, if he's telling the truth, it's huge, it's game-changing. But there's that nagging question, do you believe Bob Lazar? So I'm not going to try to convince you one way or the other. I'm going to just show you my journey in trying to get closer to that truth. For those of you that I've never met, I'm an investigative filmmaker, self-proclaimed. I make films and I investigate things. I think anybody with an iPhone these days can be an investigative filmmaker. Eventually you have to put the film out, the movies out. And I've luckily been able to do that recently. It just kind of started after all these years. I can put this footage out. There will probably be a lot of questions after the presentation about Bob Lazar, so I will leave some room for that, for those of you that want to talk about that, because it's a complex case. But I have to take you all the way back to 1989 in order to start this story. So again, my curiosity was weaponized when I heard Bob's claims. He was on the radio with my mentor in journalism, George Knapp, and I heard them talking about the propulsion system that Bob said he back-engineered at a sub-base of Area 51 called S4. Nobody had ever heard about S4. It was not a subject of conversation. Nobody even knew about the area that he was claiming this was going on. Totally new information. But the part that stuck with me was the way he described propulsion. That was my interest. Typically, if you want to make something move forward, you have to have something pushing back. It's really simple. But the way he described this propulsion system was completely counterintuitive. His claim was that these non-terrestrial craft, these flying saucers that he saw and had a chance to try to work on one of the propulsion systems, worked by generating gravity waves. And if you can generate a gravity wave, and you can distort or amplify a gravity wave, you can distort space-time. Space, time, and gravity, they all operate together. So if you affect one, you affect the others. Basic physics. The way that he described it, the best way I can imagine it is exactly how he described it. Put a bowling ball on a mattress and push your fist down on the mattress, and the bowling ball will roll towards your fist, right? So it's a completely different type of propulsion. It's like as if you're falling into where you're wanting to go. You're not pushing anything out. So that was just crazy. That was a wild concept to me. His claims went everywhere. What Bob Lazar claimed, whether you believe his claims or not, something that is undeniable, is the effect that his words had on the world. You know, words are weapons. They're used as weapons. Propaganda, that's how things work. His words were weapons. They sliced through the imagination of the American public and then the international public. This was in Omni magazine. You might recognize one of the most iconic pictures of Bob Lazar with his geeky Coke bottle glasses. And he said that he worked on alien propulsion for the United States military. But in 30 years now, he has rarely made himself available He doesn't talk about it, wants to get on with his life, and getting to know Bob. There's a lot of really good reasons for that. But most people, that's the image in their mind that they have of Bob Lazar. However, it's a new day. Bob is again talking, and he's talking to me, and he's allowing me to finally put his story in documentary film form after 30 years. This is a guy that has never profited off of his UFO celebrity. He never sought it. He doesn't like the attention. But he simply is telling a story, and it's up to you whether or not you believe him. He just wants to make sure at least you know his story. And then it's up to you. And there's more to that. But we have to go back all the way to how this started. So I'm taking you way back. The world's best known secret base. I love that. The reason you know about Area 51 is because of Bob Lazar. It's because of Bob Lazar, George Knapp, and a man named John Lear. You probably would have found out about it anyway. Our government has now finally acknowledged Area 51. But really the reason that it's in your mind, anybody's mind, why it's become a meme and there's shot glasses and hot sauces, is because it became this household name for secrecy, for UFOs, and that is directly because of the reporting of George Knapp on what John Lear was saying and what Bob Lazar was saying. So that's kind of crazy. So I'm going to take you all the way back to the first time that Bob Lazar was ever mentioned publicly, and they didn't even say his name. They referenced a guy. So you're going to see in this video, George Knapp on a little tiny show that he had that nobody watched. It was at a terrible time before he was this big-time investigative news reporter, right? And John Lear is his guest. John Lear is the godfather of conspiracy. I've known John for a long time. And he came out and started telling George all this wild stuff, and the ratings went through the roof. People wanted to know, is what John's saying true? So this is the first time Bob Lazar's name was not said, where he was referenced. So check it out. It's kind of rare footage.
Hello and welcome once again to On the Record. If you joined us last week, you heard some startling revelations about UFOs and the government cover-up about UFOs from noted UFO researcher John Lear. All right, you recently decided to take it upon yourself to try to get to the bottom of this major cover-up, what you say is a cover-up. You went up to Groom Lake, which you say is like a center of this UFO activity.
What happened is I was approached by a government theoretical physicist employed by the government who works on the saucers up at Groom Lake. He has seen the aliens. He is tired of the cover-up. He knows what a rip-off it is of how many billions of dollars we're wasting on trying to develop technology that's already been developed. And he told me when and where to stand, and we drove up there. We were actually there on 3 occasions.
I mean, the fact that that the military doesn't want you around a top-secret base doesn't mean there's flying saucers there.
No, it doesn't, except we had just seen one. The theoretical physicist that was with us that told us where to stand and what time to look. The next day he was told instead of driving to work to drive to a certain place. He was debriefed with a gun in his ear and asked why, he told this and told us that. And
well, he's worked in what capacity with them up there?
Theoretical physicist.
But I mean, what did he do around the saucers or whatever?
All I can tell you is that when you find out the truth, a month from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll look back and you'll say, my God, the son of a gun was right.
Or maybe 30 years from now, he must have said, yeah. It's so great. You see George Knapp talking there, and he had never covered a UFO story. He was covering mob stories because he knew some of the mob guys. And you could see in his face, I love seeing that the first time he engages this topic with John Lear, he's skeptical, real skeptical. And he should be. It was wild then, it's wild now, what's being claimed. But John had credibility with the news station. John Lear had credibility because he brought forward some photographs. It's of Area 51 at lake level You will never see photos like this again. It was from 1977 where the security was a chain link. And I told you that story yesterday, how he snuck out the roll of film. It's pretty funny. It's a bar story. So John had credibility because he brought these photos forward, and they actually identified a stealth fighter and a MiG fighter, a Russian MiG that was being, I guess you'd say, back-engineered as well. So he had really brought the news station some interesting information. And John came to George's mentor in journalism, a man named Ned Day, and he said, here's all the UFO stuff. There's a secret program at Area 51, and they're reverse engineering alien spacecraft. And Ned Day's like, nope. I would have heard about it. No chance that's true, John. And then there's George Knapp, kind of new at the station. He said, hey, I'll look at those documents. Boy, did he not know that would completely alter his public identity for the rest of his life. You know? So, what I like about this photo, you got Area 51 up there, and you have that little strip of tan to the right, and that is Papoose Lake. That is not a place that was known or is known as having anything happen. There's no runway there. Really, there should be nothing happening there, especially at that time. But that's where Bob said he worked. He did not work at Area 51. He worked at what he claims was called S4, a sub-base of Area 51, about 15 to 17 miles south on that little tan strip there called Papoose Lake. So that's the first thing to know, is that he's claiming to not have worked at Area 51. He's claiming to have worked near Area 51 on the same complex. But I want to still focus on John here because I spent a lot of time with John. I did film about 7 years of his life. I am sure that film will come out. To date, I put out a 20-minute short film, first episode on John. The whole series will be called Immaculate Deception. When it gets made, it's all filmed. When it gets cut and put out. But I'll just show you a little trailer for that, because John really is, he was my gateway drug to ufology. You know? You listen to John talk for a little while, and you start questioning everything about the universe. So, I'll show you the little trailer, because I make films, so I figure they speak for me sometimes.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of On the Record. In the more than 5 years since we've been hosting these programs, no guest has inspired such a widespread and enduring audience response as has John Lear, son of the famed aviation pioneer and a world-class pilot in his own right. As many of you may know, though, Lear the son is best known for his research into UFOs, a phenomenon described by some as a worldwide hoax, described by others as the most important issue of our time.
It doesn't just happen, it's written the exact second that we're going to die. I have talked to the highest people, and I know the truth. Earth is like Alice in Wonderland. Things get curiouser and curiouser. You certainly couldn't figure in your wildest dreams that it would be the most important thing when you can't see the objective.
Right, so John Lear is intimately connected to the Bob Lazar story. And the reason he's intimately connected to the Bob Lazar story is because I've talked with a lot of people that knew Bob Lazar before he became public, before he even worked, allegedly, in the program. And man, he would say things like, oh, I feel bad for John. You know, it comes from a prominent family, the Learjet family, and he believes in UFOs. He like felt bad for him. So that was like Bob's standpoint on UFOs way before he ever found himself in the situation that he says he did. So staying back here in 1989, Bob comes forward. He says, I worked on reverse engineering a propulsion system. They did not succeed in reverse engineering it. He said it was an impossible task. It was like, you know, dropping an iPhone out into the Stone Age and saying, make one. Yeah, he said it was absolutely impossible. And there was such control, and there was such compartmentalization in these programs, he didn't even really know what he was supposed to be working on until he went a few times. And in fact, this is what he says. He says, when I saw the craft for the first time, he said, I started kind of chuckling inside. Because I thought, that's what all those UFO nuts were seeing in the skies and thinking they were extraterrestrial. They were ours, you know? So that was his thought when he first saw the craft. That's how kind of skeptical or analytical Bob was. He wouldn't take anything on face value. Still doesn't. You know, one of the most kind of interesting minds that I've met. So he did a lot to try to prove to you his story. He did probably more than you realize to try to prove to you his story. He says, I've tried to prove my story. I can't. Under the scientific method, I can't prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that what I'm saying is true, so you're obligated not to believe me. And nowadays, he goes, and if you don't believe me, pass it on. Because it's caused, you only see it from a personal perspective. You can only really see it from a personal perspective, how it has negatively influenced his life, what he's been through because of telling this story, which supposedly in a lot of people's mind isn't real. Yet there have been some real world consequences. Let me just get an idea from everybody's, you know, I'd really actually like to know how we're divided in this group. You know, who absolutely believes Bob Lazar, the absolutes, who's there? Okay. All right. Who maybe not, 50%. Where's the 50%ers? Undecideds. Okay. And then how many people absolute lying cockamamie bullshit? Where are you? Come on, it's okay. Oh, come on. You're hiding. Don't worry, I'll get you after. Right, okay, so that's about average. We all want to believe Bob Lazar. How can you not? You know, how cool would that be? So we all want to believe him. It doesn't mean it's true, but it also doesn't mean that it's false. So we're kind of stuck with that. A lot of you here believe him. You raised your hand, the majority of people, maybe because you want to believe him. We don't have all the evidence. So you're inclined to believe him. As you could tell from the news reports that George did, George dug deep. And that time period was so bizarre for the people that lived it. They were followed by people. George had 6 other witnesses that were coming off of the base to corroborate Bob Lazar's story or parts of Bob Lazar's story. All 6 of them declined to ever talk with him again after they were paid a visit and told that they would be harmed. And we're talking about George Knapp here. We're talking about people that do talk to him. And the stories of these people that couldn't tell their story to him afterwards, it's pretty incredible. But other people have come forward, and things have come to light over the last 30 years. And let's look at those things, and let's see if they provide proof or if they take away from Bob's story. So Bob Lazar began to talk in 1989, and just to give you another little clip so you can judge for yourself if what you think he was saying back then could be true or not true. Here's another little clip.
All right. Well, we take it from the top then. I mean,
Okay. Well, go ahead.
how you got involved with this program.
I had sent resumes to several national labs around the country. I got a response from a couple of them. They said, we might have something in the near future you would be very interested in. You know, you say you work on little projects. I said, yeah, I have a particle accelerator in my master bedroom and things of that sort. And some time went by and they called me back in. They said there was a senior staff physicist that was leaving this organization, and they basically interviewed me for that job.
I don't know many people with particle accelerators in their master bedrooms, and I know a lot of nerds, I'll tell you that, you know? And I always found that really interesting. I know for a fact that Bob Lazar is highly intelligent. So he's got that going for him, and that's nice. I can tell for sure that he's smart, but I too was skeptical. I was probably like most of you that raised your hand. I was like, yes, I believe because I want to. It makes sense. But that's about all that we had. Until you really speak with someone, you can easily just dismiss them. If you're just talking about a name, you don't know them. You don't know their family. You don't know what they've been through. You can't even begin to imagine. None of us can. So we're all stuck with that because Bob really doesn't make himself available to get to know him. So I was skeptical, and I don't know. I talked with George, and George obviously encouraged me to talk with Bob. And I'm like, well, yeah, who wouldn't want to talk with Bob? Of course I want to talk to him. So George made a point. You got to talk with Bob, and you got to tell this story, and you got to do it yourself to really get to the bottom of it. He's like, but you got to be the luckiest guy on the planet for that to happen. And he kind of explains that to me here.
You have to cover the story of Bob Lazar, and the only way to do that is to talk to Bob. And I don't know if he'll talk to you or not, but you need to try. Well, it's all going to be circumstance for you, is the moment that you approach him, the mood that he's in, what else is going on in his life at the time. You might hit the jackpot and get him at exactly the right time, and the universe is aligned and he's willing to talk about it. But you'd have to be awfully lucky, because in general, Bob doesn't like to talk about it. I think he's very happy in his life. He's happy to have left the UFO stuff behind. He misses his friends. He misses John Lear. He misses Gene Huff, maybe even me to some extent. But he doesn't miss the UFO topic, and he doesn't miss talking about it, because ultimately it's disturbing. These are disturbing issues. They go to the heart of who we are as people, as human beings. The nature of reality itself. Is this a computer simulation? Are we all the product of an alien video game or some multi-dimensional movie, drive-in movie theater production or something? Big questions, disturbing answers, and Bob has never been comfortable in talking about them, never.
So that was about as encouraging as he can get. You're never going to get him. You have to be the luckiest guy on the planet. He doesn't like to talk about it because it's disturbing. It messed up his life. It's disturbing to everybody. Good luck, right? I'm pretty damn lucky. And the first time that I actually met Bob, like any of you really interested, I was like, okay, I want to ask him these questions directly. And I want to look him in the eye, and I want to see how he responds. I happen to have a camera, you know? And he happened to let me turn it on. And it had been a long time since he let somebody turn the camera on, right? So I thought, oh man, this is amazing. Let me see what he has to say. So I'll show you a little clip of that first time. I didn't know Bob at that time. I didn't know him. He was not a friend of mine. He's just, I accidentally got to be in the same place as him and had the camera and got to ask him questions. And I wanted to give the public just a glimpse. So I put this out. It's in a free 20-minute documentary, just a few minutes of Bob, so you could kind of be updated. This was a few years ago. But he talked about it in a different way. And that's what I found so interesting. It wasn't the Bob Lazar that I saw in all those videos from 25 years ago. It was 5 years ago when I filmed this. It was a different Bob. You know, it's like something had changed, and you'll see the way he talks about it. So I'm going to show you that little clip just so you get a update up till 5 years ago.
Look, you can nitpick anything, to the point where you find inconsistencies, and then you can add those inconsistencies up and say, you know what, this can't be true. But the thing is, you can do that with factual events. And this was a factual event. Where the project is now, where the parts are now, this is all 20 years ago. So I know there are alien craft here from another planet. I saw other ones, but I was inside one. I know it was not made on Earth. I know it was made with materials that we cannot fabricate, we cannot duplicate, and we've never been able to. I know it uses a power source that's so advanced that we could only dream of something along those lines, and the energy density on it is phenomenal. It's nothing that I would ever expect to see. I know that this is done in the highest levels of security, and that they use all kinds of methods to keep it quiet, from disinformation to some exotic ways of just hiding things. Like I said, the installation itself was buried in the side of a mountain, and I also know that there's lots of nonsense information that has gone around, and whether it was started by the Navy or military or whoever's at the absolute bottom, of the project. And I truly suspect that be the case because, look, disinformation is the most powerful, way to distort facts. You just throw a bunch of useless stuff out there and, they just take the real facts along with the nonsense and bundle it together and say, well, this is just impossible. And, there, your security is maintained. But I also know that at some point they've examined or had bodies of alien creatures somewhere. So I know that stuff for a fact. And that's the bottom line.
Pretty cool to hear him talk about it 25 years after he said it the first time. Just so I get an idea, who hasn't seen that footage of mine? Anybody hasn't seen it? Okay, so you're seeing it for the first time today. I'm glad. Isn't that cool? Aren't you stoked on that? It's like, man, it's like Elvis meets Bigfoot. You can never find him or he's dead. There's always a rumor he's dead. And all of a sudden I got him on camera. I have proof Bob Lazar exists. And not only that, but he's not backing down. He's doubling down. He hasn't changed his story. He's telling you now the same thing he was telling you then. I find that really interesting. And it's different when you can see someone has aged and they're a little bit more confident. They're not like a geeky 20-year-old kid. Now they're just a geeky adult. But they've changed. And so that little bit of footage was the first step, the first taste I got of, fuck this, I'm going to find out the truth. I'm going to do my best because this story's too big. It's too important. And look, I've already got him once on camera. Maybe down the line, 5 years later, I might be able to do some more filming with him, right? And really, I'm doing this to bring it to you because you're seeing it just like I'm seeing it. You now have 3 more minutes in which to judge Bob Lazar by, right? And that's all I was trying to do, was get more data into the stream so we can make a more educated opinion on if his story is true or not. The crux of his story is about a place called S4, Site 4. This is a place that nobody had ever heard of. There is not one mention in the public realm, not even private circles. No one around that time had ever even heard about it. Yet, things were different back then. And George Knapp called Nellis Air Force Base, and they admitted that they had an S4, if not multiple S4s. Wouldn't tell them what they did there. Now they just completely deny it, right? We thought. But George got confirmation there was an S4. So Bob somehow knew things. He somehow knew that on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. over this tiny little lake bed that's not even part of Area 51, that there would be a test flight of something that looks identical to a flying saucer. And he took people out there on a variety of occasions, and they filmed it. Right? How did he know that? That's probably a real guarded secret, wouldn't you think? The existence of a secret little sub-base of Area 51, you figure not everybody would know that. So I'm already kind of intrigued that he knew things that really he shouldn't know if he didn't work out there. S4 is kind of the key, and I'll show you little clips about that. You've brought S4 into the forefront. It's been confirmed to you directly from the base maybe 25
years ago, yeah.
S4 has been confirmed to me directly twice. One from an employee of EG&G. Security was daunting. And then somebody else who's confirmed to me S4 that that's exactly how it looks.
The story, though, is that there was a facility like that at Papoose?
There is a facility like that at Papoose. Flying discs, not this UFO term that's created to make it ambiguous, flying discs, saucers, that were piloted by non-humans. They were not ours, and this was confirmed by both of my sources, that this technology is not ours. Bob Lazar's story was confirmed to me by those two same sources. One saying that when he was working in secret capacity at White Sands in 1989, that it was common knowledge at the base about Bob's story. And I said, well, what was the believability? The general believability? And he said, everybody knew that what was going on out there were with these types of projects, and they all believed Bob's story.
And were they following it as it's unfolding in 1989?
That was the impression that I got, was that it was big news. If you ever see it, if it's soundless, noiseless, it's hovering, anti-gravitic, or appearing to be the way, it is not ours. And I said, not ours like America? And he says, not ours like humans. So this is about 25 years after Bob's story, and I started digging into it and started pulling up and calling up a bunch of the people who have advised my work in nanotechnology and in aerospace stuff and in investigations in general. The highest ranking military individual I've ever met has been someone that has advised my work for a while, was in position to know, and I've had multiple confirmations that Bob Lazar is telling the truth, and that S4, as he described it, existed exactly like he described it and for the purpose that he described it. So I've got all these independent, personal confirmations that there's a grain of truth to Bob Lazar's story. It was driving me crazy. So I sat down with George and went through with him, showed him, he knows who some of the people that advise my work are. He's satisfied with it, I'm satisfied with it. So we're getting direct testimony from people, not for public consumption, not for me to go on radio shows and talk about it, not to put them in movies, but just to inform my work. People that care about me and my work too. So it really started to intrigue me, because now all of a sudden it's not just one person saying this thing, but 25 years later I'm getting independent, personal confirmation of the facilities Bob said he worked at. And that wasn't happening 25 years ago. So that was pretty cool. Everybody's focused on Area 51. We know the great things that were achieved at Area 51. It's a shell game. It's a sleight of hand. We're talking about S4.
Right.
And we're talking about the acknowledgement of a secret base called S4 that has special projects there, extraterrestrial projects.
Well, I got confirmation from Nellis Air Force Base. So I called their public information office. This is back in 1989. We're working on this. Do you have a place called S4 on the Nellis Range? And they said yes. Can you tell me where it is? No. Do you have more than one? Yes. Can you tell me what goes on there? No. It's classified. So we know an S4 exists. We know classified work goes on there. We know that they're not going to tell us any more about it. No one had talked about a place called S4 in public before Bob Lazar. There's no printed records of it. It didn't appear in a newspaper story. He's the one that told it. How did he know? How did he know that those test flights were going to take place 3 weeks in a row? There'd been no news stories, not in UFO circles, about test flights of something that looks like a flying saucer over Papoose Lake. That happened 3 weeks in a row. They took people out there. I've interviewed all the witnesses who were there, and they've got it on videotape. How did he know? Well, maybe somebody told him. How ridiculous that is. Maybe somebody told him, but it's important that Bob didn't go to MIT. How ridiculous is that? Here's videotape of a flying saucer flying over a secret base the government has never acknowledged, and the important point of this is Bob didn't go to MIT? It's ridiculous. How about the main, you're sort of burying the headline. The headline is Flying Saucers at a Secret Base. there they are on video, and we're quibbling about whether he has a degree or not?
George Knapp calls up Nellis Air Force Base, do you have an S4? And they say yes.
Yeah. We hadn't gone with our UFO stories. They weren't on. The only thing that had been on the air was John Lear on the Record, and then this Dennis interview, the interview with Dennis. So I wasn't quite the UFO guy that I am now. And actually, the guy I talked to, the public information officer at Nellis, is somebody that I knew.
If we called and you said, does S4 exist?
I could try. I mean, I could certainly ask them. Whether they'd still answer or not, I don't know. You'll recall 25 years ago, they would answer questions about UFOs. You know, they might keep you on the phone long enough to figure out if you're crazy or not, but at least they'd talk to you about it. They don't talk to you at all. They won't have that conversation with you. Whether they'd answer that S4 question or not, I don't know. We could try. We're calling Nellis Air Force Base a public affairs office. And that's who I called 25 years ago. We'll see if they will confirm for us that they have an S4 out there. Or where. I suspect we're going to have trouble, but we'll give it a try. Hi, my name is George Knapp. I work with Channel 8 News, and I had a question. I'm not sure if you can answer it or who might be able to answer it. I'm trying to figure out if if you can confirm that there is somewhere on the Nellis Range a place called S4, a designated S4, a facility. Yes.
S4. Hold on 1 second.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Hi, Airman. My name is George Knapp with Channel 8. I was calling to see if, and I don't know if you can tell me this or not, but whether you have something on the Nellis Range called S4, a site or a facility or a location designated S4.
Called S4?
Yep.
I have no idea. I can try to get an answer for you.
That'd be awesome.
I would have to contact, see, maybe red flag, but yeah, let me write down some of your information. But what's a good contact number for you?
This number here.
George Knapp, K-N-A-P-P?
Right.
Okay. So you're looking for a zone on the range called S4?
Yeah, I'll just let you know that I had been told some years ago that there is a place called S4. They wouldn't tell me where it was, but in fact, you might have more than one. Like S4
okay.
Meaning Site 4.
Site 4.
Right.
And what about Site 4 are you looking into? What's the significance?
I'd want to know if it exists. We had been told that there had been classified work going on out there. One version of the story is that there was a facility near Papoose Dry Lake that was called S4. There's another version of the story that you've got a place at Tonopah Test Range.
Okay.
And I just didn't know if you can confirm one way or another.
Okay, when are you trying to get this information?
Anytime. There's no deadline.
I will try to get in contact with somebody at the range and see if they're familiar with an S4 and whether or not the information is releasable, because I've never heard of it personally, but we'll find out.
I appreciate it, Airman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, bye.
Yeah, so, it's just kind of interesting. He already confirmed it decades ago. We were just wondering what the climate of the situation was now. And I could, tell you this story, but it's much more fun to show it to you. I make films anyway, right? So I can talk about it, but showing you how these things go, there's a little bit of humor in it. So we waited for a call back, and we weren't very hopeful. We didn't think they were going to call us back. Back in the day, George knew the public affairs guy. This time we don't know who we're talking with. The kid didn't even sound like he knew much of the base, so we don't know what kind of information we're going to get. They called right back and left a message. It was the next morning. Yesterday you called to get Nellis Air Force Base to confirm S4 as a physical location. The one by the Papoose Lake bed is the one we're interested in. And you've called back before a lot of this was secret, and you got direct confirmation, yes, that facility exists, we can't tell you anything more about it. So we get a guy on there yesterday, and he's like, I have to go ask people that would know. And you get a voicemail back the same day.
Right.
It was yesterday, and let's hear what the voicemail is.
Hey, sir, how you doing? It's Sarah from Nellis Air Force Base. I'm calling to get you the information you requested earlier today. I spoke with the Nevada Assessment Tech Training Range headquarters, and they let me know that on none of their maps in possession have a location that depicts S4 or Site 4 as a designation. So that's what I can tell you right now. So if you have any further questions, be sure to let me know when you get a chance. Other than that, have a good day.
So a couple things. One is that 25 years ago they did confirm not only they have one, they had more than one S4. They wouldn't tell me where it was. They wouldn't tell me what goes on there, but they said it is a real place. And I've got that from other people who worked out there, not just Lazar. Secondly, it was the parsing of the language is what I thought was interesting. We talked to the people at the range, and they don't find it on any map. Well, it's not going to be on any map. It wouldn't be on any map even if it was, even if it existed. And so just saying that it's not on any map is not the same as saying it doesn't exist. It's a very specific kind of truth. It's a new day and age dealing with public information officers, and not only for the Air Force, but every federal agency, is that they are where you go for information, and you never get to speak. Unless you get their permission, you never get to speak beyond that.
It's like fishing as a journalist. You want to see where the level of secrecy is, and why S4 is important is because S4 is linked to all of these special projects that we've been looking into dealing with the extraterrestrial presence.
Yeah, being able to confirm that there really was an S4, which is where Bob Lazar said he worked, goes a long way toward establishing that his story was true, because it had never appeared in any newspaper, it wasn't on any map. That's what he claimed. So when Nellis told me, yeah, we've got an S4, but we're not going to tell you where it is, that was a really big deal. I don't necessarily think they're lying to me. Maybe this guy doesn't know. Maybe they don't call it S4 anymore. Maybe after all that stuff with Lazar came out, they changed the name. Who knows? But I just thought it was really interesting that the parsing of the language to say, we don't see it on any map.
Yes, that's just a fun little look into one of the ways that we can go about getting nothing from our government about these facilities. But it's kind of fun, and you do learn a lot along the way. It is interesting the way questions are answered are sometimes very telling. And the guy was kind of chuckling actually when he had said, we don't have any maps with that designation on it. He knew it was a BS answer to get around having to answer. So basically, there's a lot of controversy, but what is the proof when it comes to Lazar's claims after all this time? What stands the test of time? I'm not going to go over every finite detail on what people think is or is not true about the Lazar story. There are, a few interesting things. This is just a copy of it, but one of the things I went through is this box of archives and photographs, and Bob would I could pull any box out of his garage, and he did not, have anything to hide. He was just like, go for it, look through it all. But this was like a pay stub he got, and people say, well, why is it for so little? And it's because he's just getting started with a job, and they pay so little at the beginning. It's not that much money. Even this has been hyper-analyzed, and people trying to see, is it real? Because the name of the department is different than that's an older department. So there's all these tiny little things that people like to go through and try to see, does it add up? But none of it adds up to, is Bob telling the truth or not? Like his schooling. Bob has always claimed that he went to MIT and that he went to, he got a degree from MIT, and there's no way to prove that. Bob's not offering proof. We can't find proof. Okay, so let's just say he lied. Let's just pretend he lied. I don't, by the way, that's not my position. I'm just saying, let's just say he lied. Let's say he was homeschooled and just had no education. Okay, well, does that change the fact that he worked in scientific capacity at Los Alamos? No, that's established fact. And I'll tell you why it's established fact now. I actually made sure it was established fact. But the point is, we can go back to when he was a baby. Okay? And it's like, is that going to change? Is this true about this story, about what he's telling us now? And so that's kind of what I'm interested in. I really don't care if he was homeschooled by gnomes. I care if he worked at Los Alamos. How did Bob walk George Knapp through one of the most secret and locked down facilities in America at Los Alamos, going into the Maison facility with cameras? How did that happen? It's like people try to belittle the story because they're afraid of the implications, maybe. Let's stick to what we know. Bob tried recreating what the badge looked like so that other people could recognize it, maybe. And then people say, oh, you made a fake badge. He goes, yeah, I made a replica, so you're welcome. So you would know what it looked like. I mean, just all these crazy stories. I see tape up there on the right by his name. Yeah, he made a badge replica so you could see what it looks like. He also did diagrams and drawings of, these are on napkins. He's famous for napkins. I have a stack of napkins from Bob, okay? So this is one of the first drawings he did back in the day of where the saucer out of the 9 that he claimed he saw, the one that he dubbed the sports model, that's where it was. And he kind of drew it out so people could see what it looked like from what he's telling. These are drawings, I don't know if people have really seen some of these, but he saw a bunch of different shaped UFOs, but from a distance. So he saw there were 9, but some of them, he called that one the Jello mold, the one below that the top hat. He called that one the light bulb. He doesn't even remember it now. He's like, oh, yeah, that was weird. That one was weird shaped. But they were all kind of down this corridor. He only got to see the one. Little known parts of his story, very elaborate. One time, in that section where he goes, I was inside one. He's talking about a UFO. He goes, I was inside of one. And I said, well, Bob, was that cool? That's got to be really cool, right? And he goes, no, it felt ominous. He goes, it was so weird. First of all, everything is gunmetal gray. There's not any other color. Everything is rounded. There's no corner or edge. It was like an injection mold. He goes, but it felt ominous because I stepped in and the seats weren't for grown men. They weren't for normal grown men, human size, right? They were small. And he says, that was the moment when I realized, this is weird. We ain't in Kansas no more, Toto. Something's weird here. It kind of dawned on him. And then I think kind of the light display that came up with the alien writing probably sunk that right in. At one point, they were operating on a little piece on the ground, and this display came up where a side of the craft that he was inside to look at a very specific part of the propulsion system, there was this rounded window part, and it just went transparent, but not like even glass. It was just clear, so he doesn't know if it was there or not there, but on that was very strange writing, to us. We don't know what kind of writing it was, but he tried to kind of show what it looked like. It kind of looked like amoebas, he didn't know, and eyes, but it was that's kind of a replica of what he saw. Have you guys seen that before? So there's all these details to a story that are just not well known because we get the bullet points, okay? Another thing that he avoids talking about, because it's so bizarre, but he read all of these briefing documents. That was one of the times he went out there, was they just had him read through all these documents. And he wasn't sure if it was a test or a joke. He doesn't really know what's going on. But he flipped through pages and saw photographs, and he tried to draw one thing that he saw on the left, which was an autopsy page of a being. And he doesn't like to talk about it. He actually drew this, though, from memory. And I love it. He goes, that's all I know. You'll have to make up the rest. Because he said that's what everybody does. They just insert bullshit. He's like, that's what I know. That's what it looked like, to the best of my ability. So he read all these documents. He goes, I don't know if they were true. It's like you reading a piece of paper. Do you know that's true? He goes, I didn't have my hands on that, so I don't know that's true. But there were tons of things that he read in these documents, bizarre things. Back to how the hell did Bob know? Okay, this drawing on the right, that was done by Bob right after one of his visits to the base, when he happened to see on the bus a strange airplane they said worked on a methane fuel, and he said it sounded like it was tearing open the sky. Turns out, we now know he drew the back of the Aurora, which is still a very secret plane that was being tested out at Area 51 at the time he was out there. How did Bob know? How did he know it worked on methane propulsion? How did he draw the back of it correctly if he was never there? Again, it's really annoying, isn't it? Because all these things are kicking you in the ass like, ugh, I want to believe you, but I want to know the truth. I'm starting to believe you. So then I found someone willing to speak with me after 25 years from Los Alamos. After all these years, everybody's making jokes that Bob was the janitor at Los Alamos. He never worked there. Okay, he's in the phone book. I've talked to a bunch of individuals that knew him from working with him there, but I couldn't go public with it. Finally, I found a brave individual who was willing to talk to me on the record about working with Bob Lazar at Los Alamos in scientific capacity, being in briefings, classified briefings, which, by the way, the janitors are not invited to, the highly technical classified briefings, with Bob Lazar, and his name was Dr. Robert Krangle. I have all of his documents, all of his paperwork from all the contracts that he did during that time period at multitude of bases, including Los Alamos. During that time, Dr. Krangle's telling the truth. I can prove it. What was your impression of what Bob was doing at Los Alamos in the 80s?
I didn't know what he was up to any more than he knew what I was up to.
But you did know that he was a physicist.
Yes.
And that was very clear to you, that he was a physicist at Los Alamos and not, again, like the janitor.
Right.
So he worked there. And he went on record with me and says, of course you remember Bob. Bob was the jet car guy. He was a rock star. He looks like Mick Jagger. How can you not remember Bob? I remember Bob. Bob was cool as shit. And yeah, he worked at Los Alamos. Big deal. I'm like, big deal to who? It's a big deal, man. And he goes, why? And I'm like, because he's got a bigger story, and everybody says a good link to that is, did he work at Los Alamos? Because if he worked at Los Alamos, there is a possible reason he could have been picked up to work on a highly classified project through EG&G to go to the test site and work on this non-terrestrial stuff. And Dr. Krangle was like, okay, whatever. So I got him on record. The guy's a really funny guy, really smart. And next thing you know, I publish it. Next day, I should have warned him. He starts getting inundated by calls by Stan Freeman. Just inundated. I mean, God, I love Stan. Stan and I like him. We totally disagree. Because Stan's wrong. So, yeah. So he attacked Dr. Krangle on the phone, trying to belittle what Dr. Krangle said. He goes, Jeremy, what did you do? This guy keeps calling me. All I did was tell you a little thing, and he won't leave me alone. I'm like, yeah, he's looking to try to discredit you because he's invested in it not being true about Bob Lazar. I said, just tell him what you told me. Tell him the truth. So anyway, any way you get around it, here's a physicist, worked at Los Alamos, in scientific capacity, was in security briefings with Bob Lazar. Make of that what you will. Now for my most exciting part of this story. This is the thing that really gets me. Has everybody heard of element 115? Okay. So you've heard about that because of Bob Lazar. There's no other reason you would have heard about that back in 1989. Very obscure, an element that we theorized, we might be able to, create a few atoms of one day. Element 115 is a huge part of Bob's story because it's a very specific part. He said that he was told, 500 pounds of element 115. In fact, if you remember his story, that was the fuel source for the gravity wave amplifier. And this sounded like total science fiction. And everybody said, oh, it's very unscientific what Bob's saying. All he said was that there was an element that was yet to be fabricated by humans that is super heavy and has this potentiality to create as a fuel source for these saucers, and it runs off of that. Well, it's pretty wild because we can't fabricate. At that time, we couldn't at all. But to this day, and actually we will never be able to, and there's reasons why, we cannot fabricate stabilized element 115 in any significant quantity. Now, the argument that people make about element 115 is that, okay, you're right, okay, we fabricated some, we have a few atoms of it, sure, but it's completely unstable, just milliseconds and it's gone. Well, Bob always said, he recently said, he goes, yeah, that's true, he goes, but there is an isotope or isotopic combination that will stabilize it. Just because we haven't found it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I called up some physicists at UCLA, at Berkeley, a couple in Russia, and I started asking them. They're specialists in isotopes and they're specialists in elements. One of them was very familiar with 115. Across the board, none of them wanted to talk about UFOs. That was made very clear to me. This is not about UFOs, is it? Nope, it's about element 115. Okay, cool. Totally unwilling to talk about this on the record, but consensus, they all said, yeah, we absolutely cannot rule out a stabilized form of element 115. There's probably an isotopic combination because it is theorized that as you move into that realm, it becomes stabilized for a long duration of period. We can't rule that out, so it is not pseudoscience to say that's a possibility. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because I know some like physicists who are like, that's pseudoscience, you know, what Lazar is saying. Well, apparently, that's not the common thought. It's not. So I don't know why people like scream that all the time. So it is within possibility that that is true. Now, a sensitive part of the story is that Lazar described this very specific way in which this element 115 was machined at Los Alamos for use in the saucers. The guys machining the 115 at Los Alamos didn't know what it was. It would be shipped to them something called LA1000. That's what they would ship back and forth, and that was the 115. Bob alleged that at one point he got some element 115 out of the lab, out of Los Alamos. Yeah, can you imagine? Now, that's problematic. Why did Bob claim that? Whether it's true or not, we'll get to that. Why did he claim that? Well, if his story is true, he was in serious danger. That is precisely why he went on the news with George Knapp. In fact, I wish I could have seen this. I wish I could have filmed this. The last second when George is about to reveal Bob's identity to the public on the news, Bob and George start wrestling over the tape. They're in the news station, about to go live to air, and he's like, doesn't want George to air this tape. He is scared shitless what's going to happen when people recognize his face. And George is like, dude, you're already out. We tried to protect you by putting you kind of out there under your boss's name. Not a smart choice, Bob. Dennis, that caused some problems. But so if his story's true, he's being threatened. What is the one thing that could prove his, well, there are a few things that could prove his story. I actually believe Bob could prove his story. I don't think he wants to. I think he wants you to know the story, but he doesn't want you to know for sure he's telling the truth. That might cause problems for him. But let's just say it's true. The one thing that would save his ass, his trump card, would be having element 115 stashed somewhere, right? Making sure somebody knows where it is. Dude, that's proof positive. So if we're deciding to believe his story right now, wow, that's a twist right there. And he did claim it. I'm not saying anything out of line, but you notice he hasn't talked about it in 20-something years, probably 25 years, hasn't even mentioned it, because it was a sensitive topic. You might have heard that he was once raided in New Mexico by a multi-agency raid. They were looking for something. And that is a story he doesn't like to bring up because it traumatized his life. Can you imagine? So you're at home, right? You have your wife and your animals and all this stuff, and your house is just fucking raided, and they're looking for something which you don't have, right? Okay, so I'm going to show you this. This is not element 115, okay? This is just aerogel. Just say that first. Okay, but this is a piece of aerogel before anybody knew what aerogel was, that they used to package around the LA1000, which is element 115. This is actually a piece from the 115, which may or may not have come out of the lab. It's turned yellow over time, right? But this is a piece from that packaging material, which is so funny because nobody knew what aerogel was back then in 1989, so they thought it was extraterrestrial. They're like, oh man, it comes with the 115, it must be alien. You know, they had no idea. It turns out, you guys ever seen aerogel? It's like light as smoke. It's amazing. It's like insulation or something. It's light as smoke. And it's just this little clear, it doesn't even feel like you're holding it. It's really strange. Anyway, so this was part of the actual packaging from the LA1000. And, you know, look, this is Bob's story in a nutshell. He's the element 115, the flying saucers, the government secrecy, coming forward because he was scared for his life and annoyed at all of the secrecy. And it's really kind of sad, actually, what happened, like how he kind of, why he decided to do it. I don't know he would do it again. I don't know he'd come out again. You know, I think he would have loved to continue working on those projects if he worked on them, right? I think he would have loved to continue it. I got to bring back to one thing that George has said to me, and I showed you the other day, which is it's the duty of journalists and scientists to investigate the unexplained, not explain the uninvestigated. What does that simply mean? It's just we need to look at the things we don't know, not try to explain them as if we know them. And so I've got a couple more clips for you that I think you'll find interesting.
The idea that Bob was a disinformation agent or part of a program to mislead the public is wrong. He's not. And I can say that after knowing the guy for a quarter of a century. The story he told then is the story he tells now. He didn't add to it. He's not making it more elaborate. He's not remembering new parts of it. It's the same story. It's consistent all the way through.
So that's, you know, impactful when somebody kind of tells the same story over 30 years. There's some merit to that. You know, it's not changing. One thing we know for sure is real is the impact that Lazar has had on ufology and the world. And I love the way George says it.
And just think of the things that in the 25 years since Bob came forward with the story, there are those who it drives them crazy that he gets attention, that he is obviously a phony, he didn't go to MIT, he made this stuff up. I'm sorry, but they lost. Bob won. You look at how far that story has traveled. When you've got President Clinton on Jimmy Kimmel talking about Area 51 and aliens, and then a week or so later, President Obama says, hey, by the way, at an event for Shirley MacLaine, he mentions Area 51, and I'm the first president to say it in public. You know, look at what has happened since Bob came forward. The government has acknowledged there is a place called Area 51. For a long time, they denied it. They pretended that the base that everyone could see didn't exist. We know that there is a place called S4. They confirmed it to me. Nellis Air Force Base told me that there was one. We know that there is something called element 115. They've synthesized it. It's not exactly as Bob described it, but as he says, there are different isotopes. You can make different kinds of different versions of it, and eventually we might be able to make one that's more stable. The scientists who made it talked to Bob. They called him. The ones that synthesized it the first time were in contact with Bob, asking him questions about 115. The Area 51 meme has gone everywhere. It's in the Da Vinci Code. It's in National Treasure. It's in Independence Day. It's in the X-Files, the books, the TV shows. It is part of our culture all over the world. Our baseball team is named the 51s. We got the extraterrestrial highway. On a table on the other side of this room is 50 or 60 products that are being sold, product lines, different kinds of trinkets and collectibles from Area 51. Bob did that. That's from Bob. That's from Bob Lazar. That's why this story caught on. That's why it went worldwide. It is now part of our shared collective experience and knowledge, and it's not going away. So it must drive his detractors crazy, those people who think he's phony, because they lost and Bob won. Aldous Huxley said, facts do not cease to exist merely because they're ignored.
Okay, so you're pretty thoroughly up to date now on the Bob Lazar story. You know, we could go into finite detail about any of the specific claims or what arguments people have for or against. I'm pretty well versed in it at this point. I pretty much know and have interviewed and talked with everybody involved from the beginning, but also have uncovered new stuff. And so that's what my film will be showing you. It's coming out December, hell or high water, like that's my deadline. So it's coming out December. So this story has really just begun. And I'm going to take you in the movie through some areas of Bob's life which nobody has ever really been able to see. I've been able to verify some things that have been big question marks for 30 years. Bob's life was not traditional. I mean, he was kind of an outlaw. He's a weirdo, man. And then he had this like jet car, right? Just blowing fire. He still builds jet bikes, by the way. He built me a flamethrower. I live really remotely in the desert, so it's totally safe, dry lake bed, besides maybe blowing myself up. But he still likes to do and make these incredible things. So he had a multitude of jet cars, still has this jet bike he takes around, still draws on napkins, and, still looks like the same guy. It's kind of an interesting photo, right? That's from one of our filmings. Different glasses, same dude. I'll play it. I have just like a 1 minute clip and a 1 minute clip of just audio, so you can hear maybe why Bob is deciding to allow me to bring his story forward again. I think it's important because you understand why it's happening, so you can just listen to this one. The biggest roadblock to understanding is the ability to dismiss someone because you don't see them as human, as a person. So what pisses you off?
I mean, disinformation and lies and attacks that have no basis in reality. I mean, you can disagree with me and say, hey, I don't believe that. That's fine. I haven't presented you with enough information. I understand that. I'd probably be in your position. But don't fabricate stuff. There's some important information that needs to be released. And everybody needs to understand the truth to it and not distorted versions of it. You really need to pay attention to what I'm saying, because I have better things to do than come up with this. I'm not interested in doing this. I don't like being in the public eye. I don't got money for doing this. And quite frankly, I could make up a better lie, but I have no motivation to lie. This hasn't helped me out. It's something that it's information that I'm releasing, and that's it.
It's not an ordinary life.
That's one thing I would like. I don't like living in a James Bond movie. I like watching James Bond movies.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most striking things about Bob as a person is he does not waste his time on bullshit. You know, it's like he could make up a better lie. Would he? No. I asked my wife one time, I said, what do you think of Bob? You know, because she thinks I'm crazy. You know, what do you think of all this? You know, she's like, yeah, he just doesn't seem somebody that would like waste his time with stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, for 30 years, wouldn't waste his time? No. Wouldn't waste 30 seconds of his life. So that was, that's the kind of impression you get from him. I have one more piece of audio, and you can kind of see why he's probably letting this happen now. People have been trying to minimize who you are. People have been trying to trivialize who you are. People have been trying to twist your story based on absolutely absurd things. That's got to wear on people to a point. You got to set certain things straight.
It's time to pull things out by the roots, just to get things reset and get people familiar with the story and who I am, and this is what's true. The divergence has increased just over time. I'm trying to tell you exactly the way things were and what I was exposed to. You think there's something more secret than that the flying saucers are a cover-up for? Some of this stuff just sounds crazy to me, and I understand. I'm biased because I'm behind my eyes and see everything, but this is crazy shit.
Yeah, so I think it gets kind of annoying, getting trolled and, by people and, oh, you're such a liar. Why are you holding all this information back? Holding what back? I've told you everything. So I think that people inserting fantasy and fiction and their own opinions, altering and distorting his story is precisely why he's letting this happen now. You're going to hear his story again, and then I'll have some updates as I was able to uncover some pretty interesting stuff. So to kind of conclude this part on Bob, because you're really going to see it in my film, I do have an exciting announcement, which is nobody has seen this yet. This is a little, maybe 2-minute trailer with some new footage. We get to hear from Bob very, very recently. And of course, I've done tons of filming, but you got to wait for my film. But I can show you this little piece. They're using it at Cannes Film Festival to get the movie out to market, which is pretty neat. So, first time ever, just a little clip to, again, update how much information you have on Bob Lazar. Exciting.
good comes from the UFO field for him. This is a reluctant UFO messiah. It changed his life.
This week, we've heard the contention of UFO researchers that there's a secret government within our government.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
The live interview with the shadowy Dennis drew international attention. Portions were broadcast by radio in 6 European countries and in a nationally televised TV special in Japan. Despite numerous inquiries and feelers, Dennis has remained anonymous until now. His real name is Robert Lazar. He says he was hired to work at an area called S4, which is a few miles south of Groom Lake. At S4, he says, are flying saucers, antimatter reactors, and other working examples of technology that is seemingly beyond human capabilities.
I did not believe that this should be a security matter. Some of it, sure. But just the concept that there's definite proof. We even have articles from another world, another system. You just can't not tell everyone.
It was like a Twilight Zone episode. It just kept getting stranger. The fact that it was happening at all was the weirdest part. Look, it's been 30 years, and all of a sudden you raised it to this level. You know, this is a powerful technology, fearsome technology, and you just don't want everyone to have it. And it'll become obvious how to make constructive as well as destructive devices from it. It's my only guess as to why they have never released information. It's kind of difficult once you release the technology to be analyzed and give it to everyone. They can just run with it. You really can't keep the weapon potential hidden. You really can't. Look, with ET technology, you can literally rule the world.
Well, I am telling the truth. I've tried to prove that what's going on up there could be the most important event in history. You're talking about contact, physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence. That's got to be the biggest event in history, period.
And it's real.
And it's real and it's there.
I'm so excited for this film to come out. I'm so excited to actually make the film. I still have so much to do. You have to edit the whole thing. But this is the story that I've always wanted to tell. You know, since I first started looking into the idea of UFOs, I want to know, like you, is Bob telling the truth? Because if he is, if any of that is true, it is game-changing. And I got to tell you, through my movie process, we're closer to the truth than ever before, but you're going to have to decide for yourself, because somebody telling you something is not as good. But there'll be a lot coming out in that. I'm so excited to be able to bring that to you, because like just as a fan of this, I would love to see the movie myself. So all of my work, for those of you that haven't met, never seen my work before, you can spend weeks at extraordinarybeliefs.com, but there are tons of videos and clips and everything from my films, investigations, and reports. I hope you enjoy it. You know, I make it so that everybody can just watch it for free. That's the point. You know, the films are what I do now for a living, which is great. Hopefully that works out. But everything is on that website for you to just go to, enjoy, and experience. Again, I'm not trying to tell you to believe or not believe. I'm just trying to provide you a little bit more information. Hopefully, those 2 clips of footage, one I know nobody's seen before, give you a little bit more insight, and the movie will provide even more than that, because it is a very important story. Yeah. right now from around the world. People are messaging me, Instagram, Twitter, hashtag Bob Lazar. If you do that right now in the audience, I'm going to ask a few questions from Twitter. I want to flip the script here for a second, because George is always the one interviewing everybody. So I want to take a second to interview George on something. For almost 30 years now, George's been standing up and saying, hey, I believe Bob's story. But he's never really told everybody some of the things why. So 30 years ago, and to this day, you believe Bob's story. Can you just tell me a couple reasons what you did at the beginning for Bob to earn your trust?
First of all, did you notice I had brown hair back then? I think the fact that it's turned white is a lot to do with Bob Lazar. I don't know. Might be my wife Anna has something to do with that too. Our hope for the film, what Jeremy set out to do was sort of to let the world know a little bit about Bob, because once you get to know him, the improbable premise becomes more probable. And I was never able to do that in our stories. We were always arguing about what school he went to and what he did at Los Alamos and what has happened since then, and all the picky little crap that ufologists and the debunkers want to deal with. And I never got to really tell about Bob, other than his crazy, interesting interest, his jet car and blowing stuff up. But it's what won me over, I think back then, is just getting to know what kind of a guy he was, and that, in ufology, and I think most of the people who are here who are familiar with that field, you know what it's like for the phonies, the people who come up with these crazy stories. They always have to keep adding to it to keep themselves in the limelight, So one day they saw a flying saucer, the next day they got to say they were abducted, the next day they had sex with female aliens, the next day they got a wife on Mars, the next day they're time traveling to Mars, and they always have to keep adding stuff up. Bob wasn't like that. He told the same story to Jeremy in this film that he told me 29 years ago. And I think that had a lot to do with him having credibility for me. If he, the stuff that I would ask him, there were things that I would ask that he didn't know, he wouldn't speculate. He didn't jump to any conclusions. He just stuck with the stuff he knew or had personal experience with. And it impressed me that he didn't necessarily believe in himself. I mean, he was skeptical about the things that he read, the reports. He couldn't quite figure out why he was allowed to see this stuff. We have entertained the idea that maybe they had an idea in mind that he might leak it, that it was a false flag, or run it up the flagpole and see how the public reacts and then pull the rug out from under it. Maybe. He doesn't rule that stuff out. But as Jeremy pointed out in the film, the people who know Bob the best, who are closest to him, know that he's not a liar, he doesn't make stuff up. And the story has been really consistent. And then the other part that's really hard to explain, I don't mean to dominate the whole conversation here up to it, but that we had a hard time conveying was all the weird stuff that happened to, mostly to Bob, but also to others of us in his circle in those days. While we were trying to work on verifying the story and building the case, a lot of really strange and unpleasant things happened. You heard the story that he told about his tire being shot out as a warning, but there were all kinds of other really weird things. Break-ins at his house where they just move things around, break things on the board, break-ins to his car, just gamesmanship to let them know that they were around. And then for me, as I'm interviewing people who had experiences out there, 24 different people who had worked at Area 51 or Groom Lake over the years, people who agreed by phone to give me information, one after another were visited by agents who told them to keep their mouths shut. Shut up. 6 people right in a row. Today we take it for granted that our phones are tapped, that it all goes into some gigantic database in Utah monitored by the NSA. Back then, I took umbrage at it when I realized that somebody was listening to my phone. But it happened again and again. People who offered to give me information that would buttress the story that was told by Bob were visited by agents who told them to shut up or else. One of those ladies worked for the Clark County court system, And these two guys came to her. She'd been a secretary and had a stenographer in these meetings with a defense contractor at which they discussed crashed saucers. And they came to her and said, look, you're still under your security oath. We know that you travel back and forth to Los Angeles to see your daughter and that she comes here. It's a big desert out there. It'd be a shame if something bad happened. And she was scared to death. And 10 years later, I went back to her thinking, maybe she'll talk to me now. She won't. She wouldn't. So those things were real. The things that happened to Bob were real. The things that happened to all of us in that circle were real. Somebody was really messing with him, threatening him, and it's because his story was true. And I don't know if you figured out the mystery of what was in the beginning of Jeremy's film with the phones. That was a raid. That happened. That wasn't 30 years ago. That was a year ago. Anyway.
I wanted to show that for the first time. Yeah, George. Yeah. I wanted to show you guys that, for the first time. That was real. That did happen. I experienced it, and that was shocking because I didn't set out in the movie that something like that was going to happen. So I kind of am starting to understand a little bit. You can think whatever you want. That happened. So really, Bob, George and I are sitting here, and the thing is, you've never needed a defender. You've never needed somebody to talk for you. And people have said that. And the thing is, you've never needed it. You just didn't think it was worth your while. But you have a receptive audience here of people that, whether they believe you or not, they're willing to hear your story. And I think this is a different era and a new time. And I feel that now from you. So I'm going to shut the fuck up and let Bob talk a little bit, but I do have some specific questions. But from all this experience and me dragging you into this world premiere, and do you have anything you want to say before I start asking you questions?
No, just go for the questions.
All right, I got one from my buddy Dan. In a clip from, and this is my fault as a filmmaker, I didn't clarify, you can't clarify everything. Dan, in a clip from Modern Day, he says he never saw an alien. But in the clip from 1989, he references seeing cadavers. That was both the clips were in my movie. Can he explain?
Yeah, that was in the briefings. There was we were given 2 or 3 page briefings of all the other projects going on, and everything was compartmentalized. So we had, we dealt with power and propulsion, and there was another group that dealt with metallurgy. There was another group that dealt with any biological entities and anyway, we just had little briefings between the groups, so we kind of knew if there were any connections, and that was part of the biological entity briefing. So they had a vivisection drawing of a creature. No, it wasn't a drawing, it was an actual photograph. And it was, the only thing it showed was there was a single organ in its body, as if the heart, lungs, liver, everything had grown together into a single organ. And they had cut that apart and were looking at the different chambers inside. And that's pretty much literally that all I got to see from that, but that was kind of fascinating in itself.
And I mean, that's wild. I think people just kind of take that for granted. You're saying it, and everybody slip up on words. Oh, you said drawing first. Bob drew me a picture of the alien cadaver thing, so that's another thing I noticed. You get on the air, even with George, who you've been friends for so long. Bob is so worried that you're gonna, when he's talking, if he says the wrong word, just listen for what he says. Don't just try to pick apart the words. I think that's so important. And I feel like it's a new kind of day. But George, I know you also kind of hate having the camera on you, and you love that scene I did where you're in your house and there's awards behind you. You hated that thing, but.
I'll never do that again.
Yeah, I am forever banned as being a filmmaker with you guys. By the way, did anybody like the movie?
Yes.
I love these. I mean, they're so random, I don't even know where to start. Well, one of my friends actually asked me, does Bob Lazar smell like science experiments? Anyway. Do you believe undercover agents are in the room at this very moment? And if so, what would you like to say to them? So, is it true also, George, that one of the people tasked with following you during that time period actually admitted and proved to you that they were the ones following you?
That is true. There were these, one of the places we used to hang out was a watering hole called the Smuggle Inn. And we would meet there with to sort of strategize and figure out where to go next. And there were a couple of other people in that small group. And when the guy who was one of the ones who had followed us around, he met me there, this is years later, and told me that it had been his job to follow us there, and he got to like the bar, so years later he was still going back.
That's great. So they're coming in fast and furious, you guys, on all forms of my phone. I see one right here. Erica, you wanted to know, question for Bob, how close to duplicating the alien propulsion system did you achieve?
Oh, we didn't. That's just about it. I mean, we couldn't even duplicate the material that, even the casing material, we didn't really even understand what was going on. It's one of those things where we can see what's happening and be proficient at using it. But there wasn't a single thing we could duplicate at all. At least at the time when I was there. I have no idea where they are at this point.
Okay, what breakthrough, I can't really understand it, but it's my eyes. What breakthroughs did you come to with any of the research that you did there? Were there any breakthroughs? Did you experience any breakthroughs? I'm going to expand the question. Did you have any breakthroughs when you were working at S4 on alien spacecraft, Bob? Did you have breakthroughs?
Well, anytime you were able to decipher something, it was a breakthrough. I mean, when we determined the fuel was a super heavy element, that was a breakthrough. When we finally figured out how the reactor and the amplifier worked together, that was a breakthrough. When we finally figured out how to shut the reactor off, that was a breakthrough. But I mean, every single thing was amazing to us. It's like, having a couple little children playing with advanced materials. It's just all, it's pretty much all luck.
I guess, I'm going to put this down for a second. Some of the things I know that you probably want to know because it was news to me, and talking with George all these years and talking with Bob as well. Bob would say things and it would kind of hit me like, I didn't know that. If I've been researching this and I don't know it, I'm sure you don't. You said something to me recently. You said, look, I don't know for sure, 100%, that the physics I described and how it was is the way it worked. It was like magic. I was telling you to the best of my ability to what I think we got to. So, right. But people don't know that. So basically what I want you to explain to them, like you explained to me, is you're kind of giving it your best shot of how you think it worked, but you're not positive about it.
No, there's no way to verify it 100%. In the situation we were in, we just really were able to observe and then come up with pretty much an educated guess as far as what's going on. But that's the best we could do at that time.
Our friend Mark says, how fast does the super heavy element decay? Like, how fast does element 115, I guess, decay?
Well, the 115 we have, the isotope that powered the craft does not decay. That's a stable element. The element 115 that we synthesized recently, whether it was a few years ago, that does decay very quickly. And any element can have a whole host of isotopes. And those isotopes can have various half-lives or be stable. So the isotope of the 115 that's used in the craft is stable and does not decay.
Funny little story, when gravity was admitted that it was a wave for sure, I call Bob, I'm like, Bob, vindication, man, they said gravity is a wave. And he goes, yeah, well, I had a 50-50 chance if you think about it, Jeremy. And I was like, okay. And then additionally, it's like, Bob, they fabricated some atoms of element 115, and it's so cool. It's so hard to impress Bob Lazar about UFOs. It drives me freaking crazy. I just had to say that. I don't know, man. I just hope that you guys, through the movie, that you get a chance a little bit to get to know Bob, and he's not happy being up here. Like, he's doing me a favor. And it's not because he doesn't want to answer your questions. He's tried. He tried a Twitter account for like a few months. I don't know. It's just you're kind of done, or I don't know. You talk for yourself, man.
Yeah, that helps.
You're uncomfortable. Admit it.
Yeah, no, I have social anxiety, so this is like this is horrific to me.
There will be a
Bob.
Bob.
You are courageous. Courageous.
Hey guys, give Bob Lazar a hand. Where are all the haters at that told me I was a shitty filmmaker? Now, where are you not cheering in here? Okay, I'll find you, tough guy. Oh, again, I know I'm number one. So, I don't know, it's a different day maybe with Bob, and I mean, again, Bob's never been one, he's not a shrinking violet. Bob can defend himself. He's a jet car guy, the brothel guy, the shotgun guy. He's lived a wild life, but I don't know, I guess, Bob, out of everything that you did, whether people decide to believe your story or not believe your story, a lot of times that's because they either don't have the information or they do. But whatever, whether they believe it or not, is there a message to, you can't see anything here, but I mean, 800 and something people down here, 800 and something people, we got a sold out house, by the way. I mean, everybody said it was going to happen. So for all these people that came here to see you, and I know you traveled from other countries, from around the world, every country in the world, it's unbelievable to me the messages I'm getting. Thank you for supporting my work. Thank you for supporting George, who was holding the microphone, trying for 25 years against all odds, and Bob himself. But is there anything, Bob, that you want to tell this audience right now? Just what's important about your story, whether they believe it or not? What do you want them to take away when they leave this auditorium?
Really?
I always say, what's the most important? Yeah, really, go ahead. Deal with it.
No, I understand it's an incredible story, and I myself would have a really tough time believing it, as I said in the film. But the events that were portrayed occurred just like they were shown. And, quite frankly, I prefer people don't believe it, because then I don't get asked questions and don't get bothered at all. But, for those of you that can see through that, all I want to tell you is that that's really the way things happened, and that's pretty much it.
The sport model. Okay, I'm going to take one yellular question like that. No more. No more. Zero more. Shut your mouth and be out. Zero more. No yellular. You're about to be kicked out by me personally. No more out loud question. I think it's really interesting. I had a guy, he's an aviation writer, and he has a very sophisticated website about all this, and he said, one of the things that's killing me is I don't know how Lazar came up with the sport model, because it is, from an aviation standpoint, it is so perfect. The system he described, it's genius. And I was on the phone with him, I'm like, well, maybe he didn't make it up. Okay. So tell us a little bit about the sport model before we jump off stage here. Just tell us a little bit about what was most impressive to you about the sport model, about the science of it, about what you got to see inside of it. What did it feel like to walk inside a flying saucer?
It was really more ominous than interesting at the time. And everything is exactly one color. It's all a dark pewter gray. There is no sharp angle anywhere. Everything has a radius of curvature to it, as if somebody built this thing out of wax and then let it melt a little bit and then let it cool off. It's a very unusual, it feels unusual just to be in there, but even the most simple things inside are, and pardon the pun, are completely alien. The little doors that snap open are made of little hexagons. It's hard to go through everything that pops into my mind right now, but it's difficult really to say. But there's nothing that, it's like going into a room where nothing looks familiar at all, not even the room itself. So it was really something I'll never forget.
Small furniture, too.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point too. But even that's unfamiliar. Why would you have something, a seat that's half its normal size? So it was really It's a shocking thing.
Well, I just want to say, thanks for including me, guys, because this has been a ride. I mean, earning George's trust and him telling me, you're never going to get Bob on camera. Go ahead, good luck, kid. That was awesome. Thanks for the encouragement. But thanks, Bob. Just so it's very clear, Bob did not ask me to make a movie. He's getting zero from this movie. He actually gave to a science charity the last time we did a screening. The things you think are just fucking wrong, and go ahead and take that angle if you want, or you can hear the story, and you can, with your rational mind, with your skeptical mind, but with at least a part of your mind open to hear the story, you can hear it. And I'm not, even as a journalist, at some point you got to take a stand, right? I don't know, what's the ethics of journalism? I got to take a stand.
Your friend Dave Navarro was here.
He was.
He calls himself a hopeful skeptic.
Okay.
He hopes that this is true. He wants to believe, like the poster from the X-Files. But he still uses his mind. Skepticism is a healthy thing in this kind of a field. You don't have to just buy it. You're skeptical of your own story in some ways, and some of the things that you saw.
Understandably so, yeah.
You should be. But it doesn't mean having a closed mind.
There's going to be a storm of information that comes out over the next probably 6 months. What you saw is a glimpse. It's just a glimpse into Bob's life. It's a glimpse into the work that George Knapp has tirelessly done for 30 years into this story. Slowly, I'm going to be releasing clips and little pieces and just, let's get the information out there. You saw the bulk of it, but the conversation has started now. If you liked the movie, if you thought it was good, tell people. That is the whole thing. Let people know, because that's how we spread the movie and that's how we spread the information. So thank you. That's what I got to say. What final words? Final words.
Well, we live in interesting times. I mean, back when this started in 1989, Bob was kind of an outlier. He was telling a story that a lot of the world wasn't ready to hear. In the last 12 months, things have changed dramatically. That New York Times story in December of last year, the TTSA, Lou Elizondo coming forward, those videos released by the Pentagon, suddenly people in my line of work are doing UFO stories, and they're taking it seriously, and they don't start off with funny jokes and put downs, and maybe the page has turned. Maybe we really are in a new era, and that an era when Bob's story can be viewed in a much more positive way without all the nitpicky bullshit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have a lot to say other than I know a lot of people came from great distances to be here, and I really do appreciate that. I appreciate all the support that I've gotten, and really, thank you. Thank you. And really, thanks for coming out here and watching Jeremy's movie. It was fun.
Appreciate your work, man. Appreciate your work.
Lazar, we appreciate everything you exposed.
Everything.
The fact that they actually talked about it, and Bob was willing to talk about element 115, and then his house got raided after that conversation. That kind of blew me away. I loved it. Jeremy's worked extremely hard. Couldn't be happy for him, more happy for him and Bob and everyone involved.
The 115, element 115, I have questions, a lot of questions.
A local scientist who worked at Groom Lake
said to be where top-secret weapons systems have been tested over the years.
He has asked that his identity be shielded.
Exactly what's going on up there?
What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. Physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence.
What would happen to you if the government learned that you were giving us this information?
He just wanted to stay alive. Maybe this has been kept from us for a good reason.
Sir, how do we know you are who you say you are?
My name's Bob Lazar. I'm known for working at a classified base and reverse engineered alien spacecraft.
It went all over the world. He put Area 51 on the map.
Can we ever be made whole if we're not believed?
We can't verify what was going on in his background.
I have no motivation to lie. The science and the technology can change us.
We've always looked to the skies for answers instead of looking into ourselves. Imagine a place between shadow and substance. A place where the world is just thin. Not many pass through here. They just tend to get burnt up, infected. You see, knowledge is corrosive, like an acid. The mind can unwrap, so you're going to want to keep your wits about you. You got to show grit and patience. They say the secret of the finder. Sometimes that's true. You better hope that's true. Welcome to the world of extraordinary beliefs.
McMinnville. Yes, yes. I haven't outlived my welcome here. Thank you again for having me. Guys, what an incredible, really exciting weekend just as a fan, and I'm very excited. Bob Lazar is here. We did it, man. We flipped the script. Thanks to Bob for deciding to tell you his story again. We will have a live Q&A. There are specific things we'll go over that you haven't heard before. We're going to get very specific today, but write really thoughtful questions. You know, not manifestos. Questions, right? Yes, questions. And then we'll do our best to answer them. Enjoy the film. We'll be right up here on stage after, and thank you guys.
This story is extraordinary, especially if it's true. And it all started in the desert, just north of Las Vegas.
A local scientist who's worked at Groom Lake
said to be where top-secret weapons systems have been tested over the years.
He has asked that his identity be shielded.
Exactly what's going on up there?
What's going on up there could be the most important event in history. Physical contact and proof from another system, another planet, another intelligence.
What would happen to you if the government learned that you were giving us this information?
He just wanted to stay alive. Maybe this has been kept from us for a good reason.
Sir, how do we know you are who you say you are?
My name's Bob Lazar. I'm known for working at a classified base and reverse engineered alien spacecraft.
It went all over the world. He put Area 51 on the map.
Can we ever be made whole if we're not believed?
We can't verify what was going on in his background.
I have no motivation to lie. The science and the technology can change us.
We've always looked to the skies for answers instead of looking into ourselves.
Thank you, Bob, for letting me make the movie. This story spans, as you know, 30 years, so thanks for watching the movie. Let's jump directly into it. It's been said by George many times that Bob Lazar is a reluctant UFO messiah. I want to hear, when you were going to be put on the news and you were nervous about your well-being, how George Knapp had the tape and you said, okay, let's do it, and the second he's putting in that tape, there was a wrestling match. You did not want your name and face out there, so each of you, I want to hear your side on stage before we start.
The agreement was that we could film all of this back in the 80s. And that at any time, if I change my mind, George guaranteed me, we'll just pull it, that's it, there's no problem. So we did film all of it, and things started to get tense, and I began to get worried as time went on, and it finally came to the day where it was going to be aired on the 5 o'clock news, if I recall. And, you know, kind of near the last minute, but not the last minute, you know, I decided, you know what, let's not do it. I'm not going to go public with this. And George just said, no, we're doing it. And so I tried to grab the tape from George, and I think that's about all I remember. I don't know where it went after that.
Well, I wouldn't call it a wrestling match. It was more of a tussle, and I won. But just context of that is that 30 years ago this week, this Wednesday, marked 30 years since the Dennis interview, the anonymous interview. And it's the synchronicity of it with the anniversary for this festival and the 30th anniversary of that event that changed our lives and the life of Area 51 itself is amazing. It's almost like it's scripted. But we did that interview with Bob as Dennis. I had not met him. It was a last-minute thing. You know, it was somebody had canceled. I'd been hearing about Bob from John Lear for a long time. Somebody had canceled for our 5 o'clock news, and we called Lear, hey, can your flying saucer guy, that Area 51 guy, can he do an interview? I had no idea what was going on in Bob's life at the time, that he'd ran into some trouble with his employers and was afraid for his life, and was surprised when they said yes. We put the 5 o'clock interview on. This story comes spilling out. All of our jaws were dropping. The general manager comes running in. Is that real? The news director calls me in. Is that for real? The phone's ringing off the hook. All hell's breaking loose. We don't know if it was real, but we decided to find out. And so the next weekend, we go to Lear's house to meet Lazar. My news director and I, Bob, we're going to put him through his paces. We're going to ask him a bunch of questions about his background, figure out if we believe his story. And we left that meeting going, holy crap. This sounds like it's true. And if it is, it's the biggest story we're ever going to cover. It was also the riskiest story we were ever going to cover because our reputations were on the line individually as journalists. We could be ridiculed. It could damage the reputation of the station. So we're going to take our time and check this out. I had to talk Bob. It took me another month to talk Bob into getting a safety interview, going on camera, not to be aired, just to have it in case something happened to him, because there was a lot of strange stuff going on at the time.
Yeah, there was.
Threats that were being made to him. We were all being followed around. Our phones were tapped. It was a very tense time, and it's hard to convey to people 30 years later how real it was, but it was real. We lived through it. It was going on. So we had that first interview. That was our safety interview, and I promised I wouldn't air it. That was just in case Bob got bumped off or something. And also as a measure of protection, to let people know that we've already got the interview. You don't need to kill him anymore. We're still going to tell this story. And then we did another interview in November for this series. And I remember Bob Stodall and I walking out of the meeting with Bob and saying, gosh, we could do a multi-part series. This could be like 5 parts or something. We ended up doing 2 weeks. Each of the stories were, you know, a typical news story, even in those days, was a minute and a half, 2 minutes. These stories were 12, 13, 14 minutes long. And it was the biggest, highest rated thing that's ever been on television in Las Vegas. So, more context. We ended up doing a 2-week series. Part 6 is where we're going to reveal the identity of Bob. So we're 5 parts into it, setting it up. History of Area 51 and ufology and all that stuff. We've already teased it over the weekend. Monday's the day we're going to release the identity of this mysterious Dennis character, and the whole world was trying to figure out who he was. And that was the day that Bob's in the station and trying to grab the tape. I've changed my mind. I said, no, sorry. We're too late into it. I mean, literally, we were editing right up to the last minute, and I am taking the tape down to the edit bay, and I'm going to run out to this studio. And we started tussling for the tape and wrestled a little bit, and no, it's too late. We're too late into it, and ran down the hallway, stuck the tape in the machine, and then I went out on set, and history was made.
That was it.
There's a lot I want to cover today based on your questions, so let's rapid fire go through them. Bob, do you feel that this movie accurately tells your story?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I had a chance to kind of go through it, and Jeremy assured me, unlike George, that at any point, you know, if there's something that I said wasn't accurate, I just said it had to be factually accurate. It didn't matter if I liked something or not, just as long as it was true. But yeah, it certainly told the story up to that part. I mean, there's a whole lot it didn't say, but that's way too much to fit into an hour and a half.
And you know, there's like 2 hours of bonus materials, and I'm still releasing footage to clarify certain points. But just to be very clear, Bob gave me absolute access to his life, was able to interview his mom, you know, his friends that all went through this. A lot of people that didn't go on camera couldn't go on camera on behalf of Bob because of whatever reasons they had. So a lot of the information, I gave you everything I could in the movie. The only restriction, because as I'm looking this, you know, I'm looking, to be honest, you got to look for holes. I'm looking at Bob, I'm looking at his story, and he gave me complete access to his archives of tapes. Go ahead and take them. Documents, cell phone, who do you want to call? He was helpful in every way he could for me to help clarify his story. The only thing he said was, do not twist it more. It's got to be accurate. That's it. And so hopefully we achieved that, and you got a taste of that, and there's a lot more coming through the bonus materials. Okay. This is an interesting one because we have Commander Fravor in the audience, who I'm real excited to speak with soon. I'm grateful that you're here, Commander. Bob, do you have any thoughts on the recently revealed UFO videos and program detailed by the New York Times? So meaning
Tic-tac and gimbal.
The tic-tac and gimbal,
Yeah,
seeing those craft. Do you have any thoughts about your experiences and now the acknowledgement of a reverse engineering program, the attempt to reverse engineer a propulsion system as far as how they're looking at it, but more importantly, the gimbal and the tic-tac, the movements of those. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, they move, they behave. I mean, they act exactly like a gravity-propelled craft would. To me, it's a very vindicating thing. And speaking to Commander Fravor and looking at the tape, and you can see the way a craft move, as he mentioned, the way it moves like a ping pong ball in a cup and bouncing around, something that doesn't have inertia. I mean, propulsion like this is not possible with our technology, and probably won't be for a very long time. But yeah, these crafts seem to operate exactly like the craft that I worked on. So it was, I find that really fascinating. I'm anxious to talk to him some more about exactly what he saw.
Yeah, people are making that connection now because look, in 1989, George Knapp broke the story with Bob. Government program attempting to reverse engineer UFOs. Remember, we had been told in 1969 that all ended. That is proven to be a lie by the Pentagon now, by their own admission. And thanks, George, for proving those videos were real through the right process. So now, through the lens of 30 years, not only the reports of how these things move and the videos of how they move, but we're living in an era where we now know the study of UFOs has been and is currently live and strong. So we have to account for that when we look at what Bob has told you. Again, Bob is just telling you his story. Take it or leave it. It's better for him if you leave it, because his life and his wife is great, and he doesn't need more interruption. But he thought it was important enough to untwist the knots over the years that have been twisted. So that's what you get, hopefully, in the movie. Okay, this is interesting. Some of these little obscure questions that Bob didn't cover in the film. What is the history of the alien-human interactions according to the briefing documents that you were able to read when you were there? What is the history of the kind of human-alien thing? Like, what did they tell you about the ETs?
They didn't tell me anything. I have to make a very big distinction between the information and technology I had hands-on and could verify and analyze, and briefings that I read that had to do with other facets of the project, which I can't say if they were real. I don't know why they would be. Other information I read in the briefings was accurate. So, but there was some information from other groups. Everything was split into so many different groups. Some dealt with metallurgy, Some dealt with, the origin of the craft, and information was so compartmentalized we couldn't talk to the other groups, which is a really ridiculous way to have science move forward. You have to have communication. So the way the military handles stuff, it just doesn't work with research. But they were so concerned about, somebody getting more information than they need, they kept everything separate. But in any case, they alluded to the fact that there was some alien-human interaction at some point, but
that they had been involved with us for a long time. That's the allegation.
Yeah, it went back very far. The craft had been here for like 10,000 years or something like that.
Right, you had mentioned before kind of new information that they gave you the impression that the craft that you worked on and the other ones were from some sort of archaeological
That's the impression I had. It was from more of an archaeological dig. It wasn't like the aliens landed and said, here's one of our craft. I think it's just something, I don't know how we came across it, but we did, but they were very old.
I want to get into these specifics that for 30 years people have asked, and Bob has explained to me, but he just haven't explained to you. So let's get into these little details. You mentioned in the documentary that you have dismantled devices from another civilization. What fasteners, methods are used to hold it together? Screws, clips, whatever. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is something that fascinates me. I mean, back in the 80s, there was no 3D printing, so it was a complete mystery how this stuff was put together. The craft itself, there is not one single right angle anywhere in any part of it. Every single thing has a radius of curvature to it. And I think in the 80s, I said when talking with George, it's as if somebody made a big model out of wax and then heated it just a little bit so it all melted and then let it cool. And that's the way everything looked. Everything had a smooth, interconnecting look to it. There were no fasteners anywhere. There were no seams anywhere. And, nowadays you think, well, if they had some gigantic 3D printer, I guess, using alien technology, they could make it that way. But I didn't even think of that back then. It was just a mystery how it was. But, I mean, what was even more so of a mystery is that there's no wiring anywhere. The subcomponents from a reactor that generates tremendous amounts of power, and the other subcomponents, the amplifiers and the emitters, there's nothing connecting them. And when you remove them and move them away, they still work. It's unreal. I mean, it is absolute borderline magic. So it's nothing that we're going to duplicate and we're going to add this to an F-16 or something. It's going to be a long time before we know what the hell's going on.
So George has said to me from the very beginning, look, if people don't want to believe Bob, they're going to find 1,000 ways to discredit him because they don't want to believe you, so go ahead. However, if you deny the evidence that we have, then you're missing the picture. And some of the greatest skeptics online, tend to fixate on these little things. And one question that's been like looming for 30 years, and Bob and I talked about it for like a minute, and people are asking, well, how did you turn the reactor off, Bob? If the reactor's on and you're putting your hands to it and there's a gravitational field, right, and you can't put your hands, how did you turn it on or off? And that seems to be one of the things like the people that want to just not believe just bring up. It's not even in like a nice way, just asking a question. So publicly, just how did you turn the reactor on or off, Bob?
Are they implying that it can't be turned off, or?
Yes, the implication is with a gravity field as described.
Oh, so you can't reach it. Okay, that's not how you turn the reactor off. You don't touch the reactor. I mean, there are actually a lot of ways to do that, but the way we most commonly turned it off is if you take one of the emitters and rotate it. I don't know what the angle is. I think it was like 80 degrees or something, but if you rotate it, the reactor shuts down. So it's kind of a load sensing reactor, and rotating the emitter to that angle, that magical angle, whatever it was, that's like a null position. The reactor shuts down, and that's how we turn it on and off. But I mean, there's not an on-off switch. Everything is very fluid and operates when you really don't think it will.
Yeah, so how has your life or business how has your life or business changed since the release of the movie? Besides the raid, Bob.
Yeah, the raid was not a good
Okay,
time.
let's think about the good stuff. How has your life or business changed since the release of the movie, or has it?
Not a lot. You know, it's a very specialized business. We sell scientific equipment and, you know, radioactive isotopes and chemicals. It's not like the average person goes, I need some strontium-90. And, you know, they're not going to... So it's not an increase in business, although you gave me some of the extra movie posters you had, and we put them on the website, so we sold some of the posters, but I mean...
By the way, Bob's having a sale on strontium-90 this week.
Right. No, really, it hasn't affected it at all.
I mean, that's
not
good.
to any big degree, I should say.
The effect that I have seen is that now, in light of what is known publicly around the world about UFOs and about the projects, that people are now not with their pitchforks in the audience. They want to hear, okay, maybe he is telling us the truth. They want to hear what you have to say, and I think that's the biggest change. You know, Bob is not profiteering off of my film. He wants me to succeed as a filmmaker. He just wanted me to tell his story accurately. I just want to make that clear because, you know, the hardest thing that I see is that people try to vilify or try to attack the messenger to dismiss the message, and that's what I've seen, and I think it's ridiculous. But here we go. Next one. Small stature aside, why else do you think they might have been called the kids? Remember, they never said aliens. They said...
No, they always said the kids, yeah.
Yeah. So why do you think they called them the kids?
That's just conjecture. I mean, it says small stature aside, but that's the only thing I would grab onto, was just because they were little creatures, obviously. But I don't know. I really don't know.
Do you think that you were part of some sort of covert operation unbeknownst to you at the time? So you know how people say you were there, they showed you like a movie set, they faked stuff. You know, do you think you were part of a covert...
No.
Okay, so how do you know? How do you know that what they showed you wasn't faked? And it's important for people to hear.
Well, first of all, the stuff that I had hands-on experience with, it is impossible to fake things like that. You cannot fake a force field. You cannot fake time slowing down. I mean, these things are not possible at all, and probably won't be for hundreds of years using our technology. So that, you know, there's no doubt about the technology I was involved in was way, way beyond what humans are capable of at this point. The way the craft was assembled, like I said, you know, huge amounts of power moving around without interconnections, and I mean, this is beyond what Tesla would have ever dreamed of. Again, these things are not possible. So, yeah, a movie said that's ridiculous.
Bob has always made that distinction to me. I was like, how do you know the difference between, you know, the documents? And he goes, what I had hands on is what I can tell you about. You just said two things I want you to clarify. Force field and time, just slowing down time or stopping times, time dilation. Explain those.
The force field, when we had the reactor fired up, it was one of the things that Barry, my coworker, showed me. And I think I mentioned that in the movie. He said, try to put your hand on the sphere of the top, and you couldn't. It just pushed back. It was like two like poles of a very large magnet. And, you know, without having a metal hand, it was an amazing feeling. I mean, I was really excited at that point. I said, "Oh my God, it's a force field! I mean, this is awesome." And jumping over to the other question, the time dilation. When we had the reactor and the amplifier and emitter set up on the test bench, we did a couple experiments, and one of them was how we could get a watch to run at different speeds in the gravitational field. So we actually saw time dilation, so it was really fascinating. One of the things I had mentioned a long time ago to George, he lit a candle, and you can see the flame stop flickering, but it still emitted light, which it kind of shouldn't have. So, I mean, there are lots of indications that some of our physics wasn't complete in explaining what was going on. So that's why some of the stuff is so important that it be released to the public. But I don't know what's happened to this information or the technology since I left the project.
You know, Bob and I had discussed many times over the years, could this be disinformation of some sort? Were you shown something and they assumed that eventually you'd spill the beans and it serves as a diversion or cover story for something else that's going on out there, that they wanted to divert attention away from something else that was being tested at Groom Lake. That was the first round of disinformation accusations sent our way.
What would be more classified than that?
Yeah, what would be more classified than flying saucers? That's the first. But the other thing is, if somebody did have an idea in mind that we're going to put out this flying saucer story, then we're going to crush him and crush his credibility, and we'll distract attention from something else out there, that was kind of a miserable failure, because as a result of Bob's story, every media organization in the world beat a path to Area 51's door. Tens of thousands of people have gone out there with binoculars looking in the sky for whatever it is that's flying out there. Area 51 is a really legitimate national security site. The men and women who toil in obscurity out there have helped us win the Cold War. They've protected our country. They do great and important work. And they don't, I mean, this is not a good thing to have so much attention focused on that facility. It's still important. They still do important work. So if somebody came up with a plan, let's put out a flying saucer story to divert attention away from the X project, man, they got sent to Alaska or something, because that was a really bad idea. And again, Bob has always made a distinction between the technology that he had hands on and the stuff that he read, because some of that is pretty wild stuff. And it fed into narratives that were floating around in the UFO world at the time. We've met secret treaties with aliens, and we've given them permission to abduct people, and they've genetically engineered us. He doesn't know if that's true, and he doesn't know exactly why he was shown that information. And we've discussed it a bunch of times. You know, it's possible. Maybe that was an added little bonus that they put in there to fly it up the flagpole and see what happens. But big secrets can be kept. Big secrets are kept. That was one of the arguments about us tackling this series back then, is that nothing this big could be kept secret. Well, we'll ask Commander Faber about that later today, whether big secrets can be kept, because they can be. You know, 1969 Project Blue Book ended. We didn't know until December 2017, or at least the public didn't know, that they had an ongoing UFO study, that it was going on, that millions of dollars were being spent, that a lot of people were working on it. And we've learned since that there are other classified projects along the same line that we still don't know the names of, and we don't know who's involved and what their focus is. So secrets can and are kept.
So I want to keep with your questions to honor the fact that you wrote them. I can't get through all of them, but I do want to bring something up right now. The raid, the FBI raid. There's recently released agency assist reports, and I just want to tell you my experience. So I make this film. People accused me of fabricating the raid to dramatize my movie. I made it up. I dealt with that for months. They said Bob's wife Joy was the FBI agent that you saw the photo of the back of. I mean, just crazy stuff. So there I am one day defending that I'm a documentary filmmaker. I don't need to share it with you. I'm trying to document and share with you what I'm experiencing and seeing. So there I am defending that. Next day, a friend of mine, he was able, hours before us, to get a local agency assist report. We were unable to get the FBI report. Bob said there was a warrant. He goes, I saw it upside down, but you know, they didn't hand it to me. And we're thinking, well, we can't find it. So we get this agency assist report, and then like the next day, I'm defending something else. People are saying, oh, now it's prosaic. It's just prosaic why there was so much law enforcement, multiple agency, wasn't the first time, Bob, that people came to Bob's place of business. And I said, we were surveilled. We have our own reasons to understand that. The report comes out. I thought, there you go. It proves what I said in my documentary. It proves the scope, the scale, the forensic truck, the surveillance. And I'm like, oh, now I can relax on Twitter. Not the case. It is my belief, and Bob's and George's, that they were there for 115. And we have very specific reasons that I can't prove yet to you, but we have specific reasons to believe that's the case. I want to hear from Bob. What was the experience? I want to hear your personal experience. It was swarmed with over 24 individuals, from what I count, but 2 came up to you at a door. 2 came up to you with something in their hand. They were coming in anyway. Were they looking with hazmat teams?
No, there's no hazmat
Okay, so
teams.
tell us your experience, though, on this, and I'll clarify later.
No, when they first came in, they gave me the cover story. And yeah, the place had 24 or so agents in there. It was shoulder to shoulder. You had to kind of move around. There were so many people in there. And which already struck me as being weird. I said, if you guys are just looking for receipts, why did you bring everyone here? And some of the other underlings they brought with them just gave me some paperwork. They said, yeah, we're looking for, thallium metal. And I said, oh, okay, I'll get it. Gave them a little vial here of thallium metal. And I said, is this what you guys have? They said, no, you can put that away. So I went, okay. These guys are starting to section off the building into cubic meters. I went, holy cow, what are you doing? They had everybody else working down below, and then they took me upstairs. We went up there, then they had the guys jump on the computers and try to suck everything off of those. And that's when they played me our conversation, which was, we were talking about is where the 115 was hidden.
I want to get a little more specific about that. The experience, though, they said, hey, Bob, they showed up behind you, 2 people, and they have a upside-down, obvious warrant from FBI, and they're like, we have a couple of people coming, can we come in? So you're allowing in 2 people. And then all of a sudden, there's about 24 forensic collection agents, truck, multiple agencies. The agency assist reports proves this. It also says that there was a hazmat team, and the whole suits hazmat, and they cleared the place to make sure.
That didn't happen. That didn't happen.
Right, so I talked with Zach about that too, because in the film he just said hazmat because he just told me out that that's the word that came to his mind. He goes, but it wasn't like that. From what my account that I've heard from you and Zach, they appeared disinterested with this basic idea of toxic materials. The whole thing was they wanted to talk to you upstairs. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. They wanted to talk to me, and the other guys, all they wanted was a couple of sheets of paper.
So they did say to you at the door, we're looking for receipts and an order form from a client of yours. That's what they told you when they were walking
Yeah, this is something that happened like 2 years ago.
Right.
We had already been over all this, so it was clearly just a cover story to come back in and have access to the property.
Which is our opinion based upon our experiences. But I just wanted you to hear from Bob. The agency assist report is very odd, it's very detailed, and not only that, Bob's experience of what happened doesn't jive with what you're reading in that agency assist report in a lot of ways.
No, a lot of that is not true.
We are convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that our conversation was taken in the woods at his property the day before. But I just wanted you to hear from Bob his personal experience of that moment, because every turn we make, there's people that they'll never believe and they look for anything to dismiss it, or almost worse, they just believe without thinking. So,
well, either way, they're welcome to dismiss it, and then they ask me less questions, and that's fine.
Okay, back to some details from the audience. Have you ever looked at S4 from a satellite image? Could you identify it? Great question about S4. Like, could you see it from a satellite image? Have you ever looked for it on satellite?
Yeah, a lot of times. And I do like to make that distinction. It is not Area 51. It is S4. Area 51 is to the north, although a lot of people relate them together. They say S4 is part of the Area 51 complex, but even that gets into some technicalities there. 'Cause people say, oh, I know somebody that worked up at Area 51. There's no flying saucers or anything like that up there, and they're right. There isn't. It's down at S4. There's only 22 people when I worked there. And as far as seeing it from the air, yeah, I've seen it many times. There's a lot of people have sent me emails where they think they see the hangar doors at the right angle, and yeah, you can see it on Google Earth. It's not obvious, but you can see the road that I drove to down from Area 51. That's where I flew into and took the bus down, and yeah, I can point it right out to you.
In fact, your buddy John Farrat hired some time on a Russian satellite to take a photo of an exact time that you said take a photo of Papoose Lake.
The Americans wouldn't let him do it, so he went to Russia and they did, yeah.
And he's got the original negative, and on that negative is and they posted it back in the day, is a circular metallic object hovering right over the mountain range of Papoose. Have you guys seen that?
It's a poster. They made it into a poster.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, he hit it right on the nose. It was awesome.
Right when Bob told them they should shoot that shot from a satellite from Russia. George Knapp has said to me before, and this is something that project I think we're going to do together, we've learned more about the U.S. UFO programs from Russia than we have from the U.S. And I think that's specifically because George took a trip during Glasnost and Perestroika and came out with some documents from the UFO program in Russia, which the world has yet to truly be able to see. And I think we're gonna, coming up soon. Next project, George?
Over my dead body. Oh, yes. Yeah, we'll do that project sometime. He's not exaggerating. I went to Russia. I had a unique opportunity in the early 90s when, they were trying to open up to the world. They were experimenting with capitalism and democracy, Glasnost, Perestroika. I read in the New York Times that the KGB had opened up the Lee Harvey Oswald file, and I thought, this might be the time to go and see if we could get UFO files. So we did. We worked on it. We had a Russian physicist who had been a national security advisor to the Russian parliament and to Boris Yeltsin, and we sent him. He had been in the United States lecturing on nuclear disarmament at our national laboratories. Had nothing to do when he went back, so we hired him, a company I was working for, and set him up and said, go find people who were in a position to know about the Russian UFO studies who have never spoken to journalists, Western or otherwise, and let us know. And it took him 8 months, and he set it up, and I went in '93 to Russia, and I met a guy named Colonel Boris Sokolov, Ministry of Defense, who had been in charge of this Russian program. It was the largest UFO study probably in history. And for 10 years, every unit in the vast Soviet military empire at the time was ordered to every anomalous aircraft or ball of light or UFO or strange object in the sky. When you get those reports from military personnel, fully investigate it, get pictures, get witness statements, put it all together and send it to one central location, and they did. And we were able to acquire a lot of that information and interview Colonel Sokolov, and basically he said, they were doing the same thing we're trying to do. He said, we know that these craft have capabilities beyond anything that we've got, and we wanted to study this to figure it out so we could gain an advantage over the U.S. in terms of stealth capabilities. We wanted to figure out the technology, which, as it turns out, is the same thing we've been doing, trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. To be continued. Yeah. Bob, back in 1989, when you were terrified, and I just released a new video on my YouTube talking about that time when you were scared, you took friends, multiple groups, 3 Wednesdays in a row. You said, guys, things are really complicated for me. It's one thing to tell you, it's another thing to show you. There's this little place called Papoose Lake. It's not Area 51, it's south there, this obscure mountain range. There's a test flight. And I know when it happens, and I'm gonna show you. And you brought friends out there, and you showed them those test flights as proof to your friends, because you said to me, it's one thing telling someone, it's another thing showing someone.
Right. Well, working there, I had the test flight schedule. So that's when I took, the majority of my friends at that time. We went out there, and, the craft came up, over the mountain range at the time I indicated, and, clearly everybody was amazed. We watched it, do some amazing maneuvers. Since we got away with it, we did it a couple more times, and right up until we got caught. So.
And George and I have talked with, I think, everybody now that was in those sightings, and they don't agree on most things in life. They do agree on one thing, that Bob was right. He took them out there, and what he showed them, they had never seen anything before like that or since. So they also filmed it. And it's an old 80s camera, not like our iPhones, but even iPhones, you point it at dark, you get a light. However, there's a gentleman in the audience that did some incredible analysis of Bob's original footage of the flying saucer coming up over Papoose Lake. With the new software and analytics that he did, it's pretty incredible. And he had a question. Why does the shape of the craft in your video change from frame to frame so radically are we seeing localized gravity lensing?
Yeah, that's exactly what you're saying, because remember, there's 3 emitters in that craft. Each emitter is producing its own gravitational field out of it, and gravity bends light. So it's just like taking a prism or cut glass ball and rotating it, and you'll see different facets of light. So the same thing happens as the craft move around and you see through one gravitational field to the next, the craft's going to look different. So it looks like it's jumping around or flickering, and that's exactly what you see in the video.
You're probably familiar with the M drive, which is that propulsion device. Do you think this technology...
The EM drive?
I'm sorry. It's
Okay.
EM drive. Do you think this technology is close to breaking the barrier for space travel?
No, it's useful, but I am not that impressed with it. I'm sorry.
You know, it's the hardest thing sometimes to ask. I said, Bob, look, after all this time, you know, they've proven element 115 was fabricated. And he looked at me, he's like, yeah, of course it is germ, but not the stable version I talked about. There's, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of isotopes or whatever he said. He was unimpressed with the fabrication. You know, even though they called him when they were doing the experiments at fabrication, you know, a particle accelerator, he was unimpressed. The next one, I go, Bob, they just came out. Gravity is a wave. You're vindicated. It's a wave. It's not just a graviton like you said. And he goes, well, Jeremy, you know, if you think about it, I had a 50% chance of being right. So it's hard to impress Bob with. He's a very skeptical dude. So I think the most pressing question I saw on all of these cards, Bob, what is your favorite pastime?
That's actually tough to say. Well, I don't know. That's a stumper there.
I can tell you, it's making laser beams and shooting off rockets. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, probably building weird things, I guess, would be a pastime.
Blowing stuff up comes to mind.
Well, pyrotechnics, I've done pyrotechnics since I was 12, so probably that, or any kind of technical thing. I love building stuff, so it's hard to say.
I really enjoyed the making of the film because the breaks of our film were usually blowing things up or building lasers, or hearing Bob you know, talk on the phone to, you know, physicists from universities or government labs that are asking him about, you know, the atomic weight of, you know, certain isotopes, or however they're explaining it. It was above my head. But just hearing you do your thing, my goal in my film, it was not to prove Bob's story. Bob said from the very beginning, I don't have everything to prove to you my story. That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you to save my own skin, and I'm also telling you because he believes you have a right to know. Take it or leave it. He's always been like that. However, the movie, after 30 years, it's really hard to ignore some of the evidence, but most importantly, what I hope you got from my film is what I got, what I personally got. Getting to know Bob, and George told me this from day one when he challenged me in 2012 to try to get, you know, the Bigfoot of ufology, the Elvis born again on camera, the reluctant UFO messiah on camera. When George challenged me to just show you who Bob is, to humanize him, to show you his daily life, the big question we're all sitting here with is, he's telling you a story, is he worthy of your trust? That's the question. That really is the question. If we can't prove it definitively, he's telling you a story. You have to decide, is he worthy of your trust? And the world has changed now, and I think I would love to hear from George. We are living in a different world now. We're living in a world where it is now admitted there are unknown craft of unknown origin flying in our airspace with impunity and an increased frequency, and our own government is not only interested now, but has been for a long time, proven. So George, can you just touch upon Bob's story and that?
Well, it's a really exciting time, and things are starting to move so fast. I mean, 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Navy comes out with an announcement, it just is astonishing, to say, we're going to try to make it easier for our pilots to report UFOs. These encounters are increasing. There are dangers to aviation. There are legitimate concerns, legitimate reasons why we need to start making it easier for pilots to talk about it. That would be unthinkable months ago. I think Commander Fravor, who we're going to hear from later today, probably had a big role in that happening, in speaking to people in Washington and letting them know this is going on, and the fact that these reports keep coming in, that there are a lot of them that keep coming in now, dramatic sort of encounters and things that are undeniable, and the fact that, you know, we've learned a lot about ATIP and OSAP, and, you know, things that I had been allowed to know about but couldn't report for a long time is spilling out. There's so much more that's still to come. There's so much more still to come, and I don't know how much of it and how soon, but it's coming, you know, and the fact that it's synchronized with Bob's story and coming full circle. 30 years ago, he comes forward, and now Jeremy's film is out, and all at the same time, all these news events are happening where the doors are opening up a little bit. I mean, they're not wide open, but they're opening up quite a bit, and it's an exciting time. I don't know if it's vindication. I never felt like we needed to be vindicated, but yeah, it kind of feels that way. It kind of feels that way.
Yeah.
So I want to hit a couple things too. You know, Bob has always said to me, like in private, he goes, look, Jeremy, I'm explaining to you the best I understood in alien technology. I'm explaining to you the best it was described to me and what I saw. You know, I don't have all the answers. I'm sorry, but I can tell you what I saw and what I think. And one of the things that was always really touchy, and I just want to be straight, you know, did element 115 was the known fuel source for the extraterrestrial craft that you worked on. At one time in 1989, you said that you got a piece of element 115 out of Los Alamos where it was being machined under the code name LA1000. You say that in my movie. You did have a piece of 115 at one time, right?
Well, where are you going with this?
Well, I'm just saying, the element 115 was the key. It is the thing that generates.
Yeah, it's the fuel for the craft, if you want to look at it that way. Yeah.
And it has unique properties.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you explain the unique properties of element 115 so that everybody really grasps it the way I feel it?
We weren't 100% sure how it worked, because you just can't cut open the reactor to find out what's going on. But it looked like the 115 is bombarded with radiation, and it produces a stronger gravitational field. Now, the rest of the equipment in the craft, the reactor, it takes that wave, that gravitational wave that comes off of it, it routes it throughout the craft in a conduit, just like microwaves, and through the skin of the craft. It takes that and funnels it down to the amplifiers and then to the emitters. So it seems to behave a lot like microwaves do, which propagate through tuned channels. But it all came back to one little triangle of 115. That was the center of the whole craft. And no, I mean, we don't know everything about it. I'm not sure I could if you gave me a piece of 115, I'm not sure I could do much with it. I could probably make it explode, but I don't think I'm not sure I can make it propel anything. But you know, a lot of it was guesswork too. We were just trying to do our best educated guesses to come up with how this worked. And you know, our number one aim was to see if we could duplicate this technology with what we had at hand. And you know, clear across the board, the answer was no all the time.
So we're talking about a stabilized form of element 115. So, for example, I learned this in...
It's not...
well, okay,
if you say stabilize, it means you take something... I mean, you're implying...
Let me clarify. So I learned this from Bob, and I can hopefully translate to you. So, for example, there are 37 different isotopes for gold. One is stable. It's what's on your ring, right?
Right. The rest are radioactive and, yeah, decay.
So the versions that have been fabricated by slamming particles in a particle accelerator and getting maybe 4 atoms at about $1 million a piece that last for 220 milliseconds, we're talking about 1 or 2 different isotopic combinations where there could be many, many more combinations. In fact, it's predicted by science that there's an island of stability right in that sweet spot for 115. So what you're talking about is stable physical element 115, 220-something grams that was highly machined that were used in these craft. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, you know, say you were trying to use gold as your example. I mean, say you were just trying to fabricate gold, you know, just from atoms. I mean, would you say there were 37 isotopes or something like that?
Yeah.
Look, you only have a 1 in 37 chance of making it. So most likely, you're going to make unstable isotope after unstable isotope until, you know, one day you fall upon the combination that results in a stable isotope. So, yeah, they just began playing with 115, and just the fact that they made, you know, 4 atoms of it on their first try, and it was unstable, you know, that really doesn't tell any story. You've got a long way to go before you figure out every combination, and if one of them is stable.
You'd said back then that you didn't think we'd ever be able to make it. It would be too expensive, take too much energy to make a stable version, that you thought it had to be natural, that wherever we acquired it, it was produced naturally, supernova, double star, something like that.
Well, I stick by that when I say we can't produce it. I mean a usable quantity. 4 atoms is not visible, not useful. It's nothing. I mean, to make a gram of it is still impossible, even the version that they made. So, yeah, that's the amount of energy and time it takes. Sitting there plugging neutrons in is it's a time-consuming, expensive task.
So you were told that we had a stockpile of 500 pounds of element 115. However, in your hand, or you were able to work with, about 228 grams highly machined in this triangular formation. So you physically saw.
Was it 220 or was it 223?
It was 220 something, I said, because I wasn't
even
sure
I
specific.
can't remember. But yeah, that's all I ever.
Okay, but even that amount, that couldn't have been made by any human technology.
Oh, hell no.
Not even within our supernova do we think we could. I mean, it had to come as cargo from somewhere else. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, you don't know. There might be advanced ways of, you know, arranging atoms and fabricating, you know, elements on a gigantic scale that we haven't even conceived about. So the only way I know of is, you know, the energies required and pressures and temperatures, you know, is some, you know, gigantic natural, you know, foundry like, you know, a neutron star or exploding supernova, something along those lines. But I don't know. Look at the technology that these guys have. I mean, nothing said. And since they can control gravity, and they have force fields and things, I mean, they might have a machine that can crank this stuff out, you know, like we make plastic.
But my point is, humans didn't.
Humans cannot. No.
Did not, cannot.
No, not at all.
If humans can't fabricate this, and you were told this story, what's so interesting to me is the first time you go to Site 4, and by the way, Site 4, it's not toxic. You're not going to die of cancer just being there. People try to debunk Bob's story, being you can't step foot on there, too much radiation, you're going to die. I've talked to 2 employees of Area 51 who have gone on papoose for extended periods of time, and they are not sick. So that's another thing people try to debunk with. Actually, one was stopped by civilian contractor EG&G Security, and he was a Navy guy and kind of pissed about it. And they stopped him. So if there's no facility there, I'm not sure why he got stopped, but I got him on record, and I will be able to release that later. One of the things about your story that I find really interesting, your account of it, Bob didn't believe this was extraterrestrial. His friends that knew him before, that I've spoke with, said that Bob felt bad for people that believed in UFOs. You know, they got to be crazy.
Yeah.
So that's who he was before. The first time, and I want you to tell us this feeling. The first time he saw the craft in the hangar, he ran his hand along it. He wasn't supposed to touch it. And he thought, wow, everybody that saw flying saucers, it was us. It was America. That's what he thought. But
yeah, I thought that was the first time I saw it when they let me in through the hangar. I thought, oh, wow. I mean, this is the new advanced fighter we're keeping secret. And this explains all those crazy UFO sightings, and you know, it all made perfect sense to me until, you know, I got in contact with everything.
Until you stepped inside, walked inside. Tell us how you walked inside, because people want to know that. But that feeling you described of seeing everything, the size of the seats, the feeling you had, can you explain that to everybody like you explained to me?
Yeah, there is a hatch on the side that extends below and above the center line. And when you go in, you pretty much have to crawl in there. They have a little stanchion to go up there. But it was obvious, I mean, immediately when you go in there, why did they make this thing so small? What the hell's going on? You couldn't stand up in the middle, and it was clearly made for something much smaller than a person. You know, it's aside from all the technology, but just the physical aspects of it, that the material, you know, was all the same. Everything was the same color. The way it was assembled, everything started looking stranger and stranger to me. You know, and then it became obvious once we started having discussions about what I was working on that this is a reverse engineering project. You know, it took a while for this to hit me because I really didn't buy any of this UFO nonsense for a long time.
So George, I wanted to ask, you know, again, through the lens of 30 years, I know neither of you expected this to transform your lives and take over like this. How has reporting and taking that risk on Bob's story, because you vetted him, you didn't just believe him, you vetted him hard, how has it changed your life over 30 years?
Well, it certainly affected the arc of my professional life. I think it probably put a cap on what I could do because I would forever be the UFO guy. And, you know, I've done a lot of UFO stories over the years, starting with Bob, but I've done thousands of other stories and have got, you know, Matt and I have had some success in terms of recognition for those stories, but it doesn't matter. Wherever I go, I'm the UFO guy. And I'm stopped in, you know, in restaurants and bars when I end up in a bar, and at men's rooms and urinals, as I told yesterday, and in foreign countries and airports, and, you know, the UFO guy, and at grocery stores, and people want to come up and, hey, do you really believe that stuff? And, you know, they don't really care what I believe about UFOs. They want to tell me their UFO story, and it's just amazing to me that everybody's got one, everybody's got one. It's somebody in their family, they've seen something, or somebody else in their family, or their grandma has a story, or something landed in the backyard or out on the farm. It's amazing how far it reaches. So it has changed me in a lot of ways in that I was not really that interested in it, you know, until started working on this. And then it's captured my attention ever since. I don't work on UFO stuff all the time, but I think about it all the time. So I would add just one other thing, in that skepticism in this topic is important. It's important for you to be skeptical and ask questions, but skepticism in the sense of, hey, I want to know more, I want to learn more, I want to ask questions, I want to have those questions answered. That's fine. You need it in here because there's so much crazy stuff in the UFO world. It's right to ask questions of Bob and ask about his background and figure out if there's logic to what he's saying. But skepticism and debunking are two different things. There's so much garbage and junk. There's so much backbiting and infighting and turf wars and debunking by UFO people. Presumably people are interested in getting to the bottom of this, who, because a story comes from somebody else, they got to attack it. And it's just an amazing learning experience the last year or two since ATIP, OSAP, TTSA, all that stuff came out, how vicious the field can be. It's debunking, it's not skepticism. So ask questions, be skeptical, but have an open mind and an open heart and be willing to learn stuff about it. What we've learned from Bob is, I think it's true. If it wasn't true, I wouldn't still be reporting about it 30 years later. This mystery seems to be tantalizingly out of our reach. You know, we learn a little bit more and it moves a little bit away. The goalpost seems to move a little bit. Maybe it's leading us somewhere. Maybe it's a learning curve. I hope so. But we don't know. But it's an exciting time. I'm so glad for Bob that some of these other events have happened to sort of like take the burden off of him as being this lone nutball talking about flying saucer programs, reverse engineering, because he hasn't deserved the scorn and ridicule and you know, all the stuff that's come with it over the years. It's been a bitch. It's been a bitch.
Well, I want to end on one question for you, but I just want to say, you know, thank you Bob. Thank you, George, for letting me go on this ride with you. I hope that we were able to bring things forward in a way that were logical for people to be able to consume. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. You guys, I know, have been in this war together for 30 years, just trying to get to the truth. Kind of last question. What do you want the audience here in McMinnville, from your story, what is it you want people in the world to know from watching your film? What is it you're telling them? What do you want them to understand? Very simply.
It's just like I said in the movie. The events that I portrayed, everything that I said, happened exactly like I said it did. That's all. The government really does have, or at least at that time, had recovered alien craft, and they were spending a lot of time and money trying to figure out how they work and see if they could duplicate it. I have no idea where the project is now, but back then, that's what was going on, and that's what I did.